Dallas. Is Dallas, right?
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this operations work group meeting dated January 13th, 2025 to order. As I understand it, we have a few public speakers.
No public speakers, just interpretation.
Okay, yes, we do have Spanish interpretation on hand for tonight. There's a separate link and a Zoom button available for those who wish to use that.
But then what if they're gonna charge me? Well,
Otherwise, let's get to the minutes. So I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group meeting dated November 11th, 2024.
Second, Vicky Vandermeer.
Thank you. Board member Fernando, your advisory vote.
Aye.
All right, all those in favor?
Hi.
Aye. Motion carries 6-0. Okay, so kind of a busy agenda for tonight. We are going to review ongoing efforts to improve recruitment and retention and HR district. We will then get ourselves grounded in the budget development process for this upcoming fiscal year. Review facilities update following referendum passage this past November, and then 3 policies to review. 2 will be rescinded. So with that, we have our HR folks on hand. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Castro, board members, for being here tonight. Those of you at home, staff listening. We've got a lot to present to you tonight, lots of numbers, lots of information, some progress, some updates, a chart for how we're going to be moving forward and creating the 25-26 budget. But to start with tonight, we're going to have our Office of Human Resources share some updates on our retention and recruitment and retention efforts. And Jennifer Trendell will be presenting, but again, members of her team and staff are here as well to take any questions that you might have. Then I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Superintendent Gothard and Chair Castro. Thank you for having us here tonight. We want to discuss our recruitment and retention purpose. Sorry, Bessie, I skipped right to slide 7.
7.
Yep. So our recruitment and retention strategies aid in attracting, hiring, and retaining top talent to our destination district and align with HR's goals of building and retaining a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce with a focus on a culture of caring, growth mindset, and well-being. So that is what we are grounded in the district, our district values and goals. So the next slide. How I'm going to lay this out is we had an audit that was performed in 2023, and a lot of this work is aligned to the work that the information that was in that audit, some improvements that we made last year, and then the ongoing our ongoing improvements that we're making. So the salary enhancements and adjustments, we hired a compensation analyst, which has resulted in salary audits, compensation analysis, and salary adjustments. We implemented a sub-teacher bonus program as part of the budget 24-25. We increased the substitute administrative pay as part of the budget. Internally, HR is committed to improved customer service, which includes improvements with our candidates and our hiring managers so that we have a shorter fill time for our vacancies. We've enhanced communication regarding our benefits and total rewards, and making sure that our staff know that our benefits are competitive and some of the best in class in the county and the surrounding area. On the next slide, we talk about We also have made a lot of improvements with our data dashboards. We've gone to boarding, which has improved our candidate experience. The enhanced hiring manager user experience. We are continually working in that. I'll refer to Cornerstone. And that is our applicant tracking system. We've shortened the application timeline experience. We've clarified and simplified information. And then we're going to start looking at some of the real data, which includes the increased fill rates for some teachers, which ties directly to the salary increases that were approved in the budget. So if you can go to the next slide. This is a comparison of where we were for first semester last year and first semester this year. So we have consistently for teachers been over 75% of fill rate. On the next slide, we have our sub SEAs, and we're right at that 75% fill rate for the entire semester, and all of last year, we barely made it over 50%. So we're definitely seeing impacts from the budget approval of the increased rate of pay and the bonus programming for the substitute teachers. This is also helps the classroom experience for our teachers who are not having to do class coverage, not having to fill in for their colleagues. We can have substitutes available for them. So on the next slide, these are our recruitment strategies. We look at, we're going to look at tonight our applicant sourcing, our advertising strategies, our utilization of technology, how we optimize social media, recruitment events that we've been attending, the job fair that we had in 2024, and our community partnerships. Slide. So this is our applicant sourcing, and I'm just gonna refer to my notes here. This is, we ask our candidates how they found out about the position. And a lot of them find out about it. Oh, sorry, that's the next slide, but let me, this is, so this is where our applicants are actually finding out about our vacancies. They're going directly to the MMSD website, or they're asking a current employee. Some of them come from Indeed. We also use WeCan, Facebook. Handshake is what universities and colleges are using as their platform for registration for their career fairs. So if you go to the next slide, this is where our candidate sources are. So we get most of our candidates because our current employees refer people to us. Our second highest is student teachers, returning employees come back, and principal referrals make up the top. So we are striving to be a choice employer in the region. We have increased our social media engagement by using LinkedIn, Indeed, and all of the resources listed here. We've also engaged with professional organizations and our community partnerships, and we do try to have some targeting advertising efforts. At the current time, our recruiter position is vacant, so we are not optimizing this in the way that we would like to, but when we have a recruiter, these are a lot of the places that they have been reaching out to and engaging with. So if you go to the next slide, when we have our recruiter on staff, they engage in the social media optimization, which includes job postings with keywords, sponsoring job posts, building a strong employer client brand, and making sure that we are using advanced search filters. All of these things work to optimize the social media experience with candidates so that they can find us and apply for our jobs. The next slide is an example of the optimization with Education Weekly. We had a 14 point and almost 15% response rate. And the industry average is about 5%. So candidates are seeing our advertising and they are applying. Next slide. This is an upcoming recruitment event. We're planning already for summer 2025. We had a really good experience in July of 2024 where we had over 200 interested people come to check out MMSD. We are going to be having a student teacher event so that we can provide an opportunity for student teachers to connect with principals and leadership to learn more about MMSD. There were a lot of new student teachers who started today, and many more start on the 21st of January. This slide is a recap of the 2024 job fair that we hosted, and based on the success of it, we will repeat that for 2025. Next slide. This is an overview of the job fairs that we have participated in that other people posted, and then we have a few that are coming up. This is just a partial list as more opportunities come available. Make sure that we have presence there. Next slide. One of the community partnerships that we had was with the Urban League, and they provided specific trainings for some SEA candidates to fill our open positions. And the results were that 15 SEAs did the training and had opportunity to interview for vacancies. We are also using an outside agency to hire and recruit international teachers. MMSD is not currently sponsoring visas. So we work with that external vendor. We're also trying to maximize our early hiring and work cross-departmentally to conduct interviews for the hard to fill positions like CC, ESL, DLI, and BRT, and then hosting that student teacher recruitment earlier in the spring to ensure that we're getting those candidates who already have experience here with the district. Next slide. This is specifics about cultural vistas and the schools where they are. We have 21 international teachers who bring with them their bilingual and bicultural experiences. They're at 11 schools. The cohort who started this year are here through 2029. So our retention strategies.
Sorry, I'm sorry, interpreter here. I don't have the line to interpret. The bar, it disappeared on me.
Okay, we're done getting. I think we can only have one interpreter at a time, right? And that's currently doing it.
Should be 2 at a time. We usually have 2.
Okay. Do you see it now? I think we're good now. Go ahead. about that. That's my first time doing this interpretation.
All right. So our retention strategies are to decrease our turnover rates and maintain competitive compensation and benefits and provide our employees with development opportunities and also highlight our benefits and our work environment. On the next slide. This is very tiny, but this shows our demographics, our employee race, ethnicity, and gender. And it's 2 points in time. It is July 1st through December 31st of 2023 and July 1st through December 31st, 2024. So if you go to the next slide, the numbers that are on that chart are actually here. This is, we have made a slight improvement in ensuring that our staff is reflective of what our student population looks like. It's not a very big gain, and we would definitely want to make sure that we're retaining all of our staff of color. And so that our students and our staff look the same. On the next slide, this is it's a multi-year comparison of employee turnover percentages, and the 24-25 is only through December 31st. And each of the trend lines shows that the turnover is going down, which means that we are retaining more of our employees. So some of the levers that we're using to retain our own are the Growth Associate Program. This is the program where employees are able to earn an associate of arts degree at Madison College and then transfer to UW-Madison. There we go. And this is the one that was approved this year. So we had for this year's budget. So our cohort for this year is 19. And this is our first experience with this cohort, and we are excited that we had that many join the program. The next slide is what we call the Aldi program. This one has been going on for several years. And these are the qualifications and the how you are able to apply for this program. These are special education, which is one of our high needs areas. The next one is our district preparation pipeline program. Again, this is the first cohort, is 2024-25. And okay, we'll go to the next slide, the compensation and benefits. We do offer competitive salaries, and we want to continue to do that. We also offer very robust insurances. We have voluntary retirement plan participation in addition to the Wisconsin retirement system. This slide might be out of order because we talked about some of the professional development opportunities. And then we also make sure that we recognize our staff through our service awards. So on the next slide, some of our work environment improvements are really focusing on performance feedback, using evaluations, using Cornerstone, making sure that supervisors are providing that culture of feedback and professional growth opportunities. One of the values of that it has a library of professional growth videos that you can assign to your staff. This is in addition to all of the professional learning that our own staff offers on professional development days. We do offer the employee assistant program in case someone is struggling with mental health or financial financial questions, and we also have our wellness committee. And I think that's my last slide, so questions at this time.
Board Member Vandermeer, and then Board Member Monroe.
Yes, in the future, if it's possible, and it may not be, can we disaggregate the data on disability of employees if they disclose it? I know we have race, we have gender, we have other, like biracial and that, but I think the disability and how many of our staff are, I think could be very helpful. I'm not saying they have to disclose,
Okay,
but I'm just saying that that might be helpful.
thank you.
And I really would appreciate. And only thing, two questions. One comment, one question. Comment is, can we please, I like that you are increasing retention by offering positions earlier, especially regarding special education. I think that's absolutely crucial because we were losing some really good quality candidates. And so I really think you did really well on that. But the other thing, because I will hear about an email one way or the other, who qualify for the salary adjustment, it is based on certain positions that have been worked out by HR, correct?
Can I ask a qualifying?
Of course, always.
question for that? So your question is about the salary
Yep.
adjustments that were made
Yes,
here in this fiscal year?
Yes.
Student services?
correct.
Yes, those were positions that were identified as being positions that were like hired and supervised at Doyle and attached to the student services department, or that were specifically named in the handbook as having advanced place on the salary schedule.
That's beautiful. That's all I needed to know. That was my question because I was confused on that. And I'm like, I want to get in the handbook issue. I just didn't know. That's all. Here.
Thank you, Board Member Muldrow.
I have some questions about diversity and inclusion. Can we go back to the slide that is a breakdown of the demographics of our staff or all of our employees, I think, right?
26.
Yes,
My first question about that is that, I assume that's all employees, that's not specific to teachers, right? Okay, so my next question would be, is there any slide that shows us the demographics of our teachers?
it's not specific to teachers, no.
Okay. I do think that that would be a really helpful thing, particularly in terms of, you know, it's one thing to see people of color in your school as janitors or security guards. It's another thing to have a Black person as your math teacher. And I think there is some relevance to really doing this work intentionally. The next question I wanted to ask was specific to hiring and administrative leave. So the first question is, when we're hiring people, how often is a hole being filled at one school by creating a hole at another school at this point in the year?
So there is language in the handbook that disallows transfers to happen mid-year.
Okay.
Because it's just disrupts. So most of the hiring that is happening at this time of the year is not due to an internal transfer. It is someone coming externally. There are a few cases where it's an internal transfer, but we understand that it is disruptive to scholars when that happens.
On average, every year, how many staff or educators do we put on administrative leave?
Year over year, or
Year over year?
there's approximately 11, 10 to 11 who are on administrative leave.
Currently?
That's you asked for an average.
Okay, that's better. Thank you. So about 11 staff every year are on administrative leave. Do we know on average how many of our staff are on maternity leave on average each year?
We don't track specifically for that. It's medical.
So I think like that to me, I've heard several people on the board and in the administration talk about kind of how we take care of a child, you know, throughout their life, right? From prenatal, through graduation or to adulthood. And I think like a great place to start that conversation is with our own staff. And so our own policies and practices for maternity leave and pregnancy, seem like an area in which we can be tremendously impactful in cultivating the kinds of things we believe in for families and for parents. So I'm curious, my understanding is parental leave and maternity leave, you access it through your sick leave, is that correct? So based on how much sick time you have, is how much paid time you get off if you have a baby?
There's, it's not quite as simple as,
Okay.
as that. There are, like, in the handbook allows for a child rearing leave, so anybody in any employee group can apply for a child rearing leave, which means that their position is available to them after, it's an unpaid leave. The child rearing leave is, if you're on if you're taking a paternity leave, I'm gonna ask Angela Tefner to respond to that question. She is our HR operations director and has a wealth of experience with the leaves.
Yeah, so you could qualify for federal medical leave, or you could qualify for Wisconsin FMLA. There are certain requirements to go on that protected leave. We do have unpaid medical leave also available through our handbook. But the requirements for FMLA, which is 12 weeks of protected leave under the federal law, is that you have to have worked the preceding 12 months for the organization and 1,250 hours. The Wisconsin is a little more flexible. Again, it has that 12-month requirement, but it's being paid for 1,000. If you don't fall for one of those or qualify for one of those, you could potentially take the unpaid medical leave.
So unpaid medical leave is an option for maternity leave with this district, and I would imagine it's not a highly desirable option.
She's right.
Yeah,
Sure.
there's the teachers have a sick bank, which they can access if they run out of their own paid time off. The district also offers short-term disability to any employee who wants to have that, and the short-term disability will pay 67% of, I'm looking at you, Angela.
Yeah.
That'll pay 67% of that person's salary are out, and they can use that to extend. They can either use it to, in conjunction with their own personal leave time, so that they can be in paid status when they have any medical issue.
Okay. Do we have anything that is like this specific policy dictates that any person who needs maternity leave or gives birth or needs parental leave for foster care, so on and so forth, has a certain amount of time that doesn't necessarily impact their sick time, that they can be off as, you know, in concert with our district?
But there isn't anything structured specifically that way. We'd have to make sure that we are in alignment with anything that's federal or state mandated.
But we live in a country that doesn't have maternity leave, and I don't think that dictates that we have to be a district that aligns with it. I think we as policymakers have an opportunity to serve our community better and our staff better and, you know, families better, by really thinking about how to do this in a way that promotes equity and well-being. I think that is my last question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Board Member Nichols.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the update. I'll circle back to a couple things that were in tonight's presentation, but I wanted to start first with the Whitley audit that you kind of opened with from 2023. And in my notes, from last February, when we met with you, there were 6 areas that were identified for immediate improvement in HR. The first one was structure and staffing. The second was use of technology. The third was recruiting, hiring, and onboarding. The fourth was customer service and communication. The fifth was process improvement. And the sixth was in the area of training. And some of your presentation tonight spoke to those kind of 6 areas. So I appreciate hearing about that. I was wondering, and if you don't have an answer tonight, it's okay. We can always think about maybe an update at a later time. But in the first area of structure and staffing, which wasn't about tonight's presentation, I am curious, in the year since we last had that update, do you feel like the department is now structured and staffed to kind of help address some of the other issues around recruitment, retention, supporting schools with hiring managers, the use of Cornerstone? Could you speak a little bit just to the structure and staffing piece of the department now?
Sure. We have 37 total FTE for the HR department.
Okay,
The Cornerstone applicant tracking system is a big piece of technology that doesn't have anyone dedicated to it. We call it everyone's side hustle. So that has led to us having not optimizing it in the manner that we would like to. We have one recruiter position, and we have had some turnover in that position this year, and we have realized that by having like really a division of one, that sometimes has caused us to not be able to attend as many things as we want to. But the whole team has really stepped up and attended these events, have gone in person and represented HR. And it isn't just like HR hasn't gone. We've asked folks from other departments to go to that, and they have certainly volunteered. We know that everyone is a recruiter. And so, just based on where people are hearing about us,
okay,
are talking positively about HR. We're still it's been 18 months since I've been in this position, so we're still working on a little bit of stabilization because we have had some turnover, but we're really, really close to being enough efficacy and enough folks to do the work.
thank you for speaking to that. One of the things around the structure and staffing, as I recall, was also around training within the department. And there was I know the year that Dr. Anderson was also helping, there was an emphasis on cross-training analysts and folks in the department, getting more of the online training around Cornerstone, starting to get clearer about employee evaluations and all of that. Can you say anything about that particular area around the training within the department and how to create, I think, more efficiency, customer service, kind of response rates to applicants and our school staff?
Sure. We have had some turnover on the analyst staff, but it has been mitigated by having like a lot of our processes be documented so that we are able to have time for the analysts who are there to provide training to anybody who's coming in and doing that onboarding. You know, when we restructured the department about 2 years ago, having it split into operations and to staffing has helped tremendously. Because we can, it's almost like we have like this immediate view into what's going correctly and what's not going correctly, and we can we can do that. So, we are making sure that we're documenting things. I place a high emphasis on customer service and continuous improvement. So we have a lot of discussions about how we can get better. And I know in other spaces, they say we want to get better at getting better. So that's definitely, we take that to heart as well.
Okay, great, thank you. One of the other things, and then I'll move more into a question I had about tonight's presentation, but one of the things that we knew was an area that needed some work about a year ago was the area related to ensuring that all of our employees had valid licensure. And so can you speak a little bit about what's happening in the department to kind of ensure that the communication with employees who need to complete, I don't know, whatever it is that they need to complete is happening, and
Sure.
we're not waiting until the last, I guess until it's, I don't want to say last minute, but until they're like in a point of not having the licensure requirements.
So we have a specialist who's dedicated to doing licensing and monitoring licensing. He meets regularly cross-departmentally to make sure that people don't have, that they do have a valid license. It's and there is a cadence that is set up so that we're communicating with employees who need to be making progress towards their license with stipulations, so that, like if it's 3 months out and they don't have it, or it's 6 months out, there's demarcation points where the employees are getting communicated with so that they are not falling behind.
Okay, great. When you were with us in October, we were at the beginning of the year, we were celebrating how much just the 6 weeks into the school year, the vacancies were significantly reduced or improved. And I know at that time, we were celebrating in October that 28 schools at the beginning of the school year were sitting with 0 vacancies. 21 schools had 1 to 2 vacancies. And you guys were just doing a really good job of tracking the vacancies. So when I look at tonight's presentation, knowing that things don't just stay static, are there still any vacancies or schools that are kind of on your kind of top priority list to be paying attention to even at this point in the year?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I pulled some information this afternoon and compared it to where we were last year at this time. So on January 9th of 2024, we had 87.5 FTE teacher vacancies. And this year we're at 31.49, which isn't 0, but that's almost, it's more than 50 fewer teacher vacancies than we were last year at this time.
Wow.
And for SEAs, we were at 46.42 last year, and this year we have 14.8. So we're making some tremendous inroads into filling those vacancies.
That's awesome.
There's a few, I mean, the high schools have a higher number of teachers, and so they have a higher number of vacancies. But I have a report right here that that I look at every day. There's dashboards that senior leadership can look at to see which schools are trending high on any type of vacancy.
That's awesome. What do you contribute to that huge improvement?
I think that a lot of the retention and the trend line slide shows definitely was like at 2022 when there was the $5 an hour increase for certain staff members, and also the commitment to the full CPI on the following year. Our wages are very competitive.
Okay,
And so people are staying. I think that people are really understanding that our benefits are first class. And we're making sure that we tell people.
okay,
And so, and also, having substitutes in the classroom makes it, you know, I don't hear any of the chatter this year and maybe just in different spaces, but, our class coverage is down, so, we're just having more subs in the schools, making it, easier on our existing teachers.
that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that's a lot to celebrate.
It's
Very
very much
yeah,
worth
it
celebrating.
feels good to be on a more proactive side of this conversation than more of the kind of reactive side that I think we had been in for a couple of years, so I appreciate it. Okay, now for tonight's presentation. Thank you for all of that, Jennifer. This is a really should be an easy technical question. For the application survey responses where you said you asked folks where I think you called it applicant sourcing, where they had heard of, or how they heard of our job opportunities. I noticed that the MMSD website was over 1,000 of the responses, a current employee, 900 responses. Indeed was the next kind of highest source with slightly over 500, and then other was in the 358, and then you had WeCan, job fairs, Facebook, other job fairs at a college or university, a handshake, radio. When applicants complete that question or answer that question, is it a select all that apply? Or is it your primary source? Do you know what I mean?
I do, but I don't know the answer, so
Okay.
I will have to get back to you.
Okay. Yeah, I was just, and again, it's a minor technical question, but it left me wondering about particularly the MMSD website, current employees being the top two. If those were automatically, or no, not automatically, likely a one of the responses, and then what would we know about the other ones if people were selecting all that apply versus just one? Okay, well, that was my small technical question for tonight, but otherwise, I appreciate the updates on the progress you've been making on that Whipley, those Whipley recommendations, and I just appreciate all the work that's been happening to improve recruitment, retention, and keeping our classrooms full. Thank you.
Commissioner Feltham and yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations on those fill rates. That looks amazing. And I think said when classroom teachers don't have to cover during preps, that means they can prep, and teaching's not easy, so you need to prep. And it makes a big difference in what sort of provide in terms of the educational experience that students get. So Mazel tov, that looks awesome. I have some questions. My first question is about the compensation analyst position of salary audits, compensation analysis and salary assessments. Can you say more about that? Is that wholesale? Is that just around the student services stuff? What does that look like? Can you say more about that?
Sure. Some of it has to do with the that were made around student services, but it also is making an effort to make sure that we're within market salaries, that when we're hiring new folks, that we aren't creating additional salary compression issues, and that we're very mindful of how we are placing people on our salary schedules.
Okay. Do you work off of a set of best practices, or do you work off of rubric or grid to make those decisions? Like, how do you decide when you're placing a new hire?
There are, there's a wealth of information that's available through the CISA and through DPI about what, and also, shared among the regional HR leaders about where people are placing other salaries. We do some benchmarking, against data that's available.
Okay. And then where like MMSD has, what's the word? It's not jurisdiction, it's a different word. That means kind of like decision-making authority, flexibility to place somebody on the salary, like
Discretion.
discretion, thanks. Jurisdiction was like, okay, it was not that.
It was close.
When you have discretion to do that, are there, like, how do you make those decisions? Like what, theoretically, it would say you have this many years of experience, here's the role you're in, here's your certifications and your credits, here's your salary, but I know that it doesn't always work that way. So what else goes into those decisions?
So we have some guidance documents that, that talk about best practices, and if some of the placements are capped, so you could have 20 years of experience, but if it isn't directly correlated, and these aren't necessarily for teaching positions, but some of our other positions, we don't place any higher than a certain level, and so we're treating everybody who is in district the same way.
And that's, those are guidance documents that we've internally created.
Yes.
Okay. Is the practice still that when a teacher is hired in MMSD who has years of experience teaching outside of MMSD that they start with 0, or are the years of experience counted?
Some of our experience are taken into account.
And does it sound right to you that hasn't always been the case, or am I misunderstanding?
Maybe a decade ago,
Okay.
it wasn't the case.
Sure, when I was hired in MMSD, gotcha. Okay, thanks, but that's no longer the case. Great, I'm so glad to hear it. My next question is about missing people for their salary adjustment based on job role. Can you explain why adjustments were made for people who are in student services, don't have that in their job title in Doyle, but not in school buildings?
Can you repeat that?
Sure, so I understand that when we made adjustments to student services staff based on salary compression, that if your job is school psych, easy peasy, no problem. But if your job title wasn't school psych, there were problems, and that was corrected for teacher leaders at Doyle, but not for people doing other types of student services work with different job titles in the schools. Can you explain why it would be corrected at Doyle regardless of job title, but not in the schools? Like why there would be a different standard there?
Those salary corrections were made based on the titles that were listed in the handbook specifically. And then anyone who was tied, like supervised or like supervisorily, or their FTE was based out of the student services department here at Doyle.
Okay. So supervising for that. I guess it doesn't totally explain why it wouldn't be the same at the schools. Like why someone who is supervised as a student services employee who's in that.
Yeah, student services here at Doyle gets a bucket of like FTE.
Okay.
And there are.
I see. And that bucket is not the same at the schools.
Correct.
So let's talk about the bucket of jobs that are like wiggly at the school level. I'm in one at a different district. Like a lot, as I understand, many of those jobs are, they're teacher contract jobs, but there's lots of different types of work that someone in that type of job might do. Can you talk to me about, and like, what I understand also is that like, when those jobs are put into the workbooks, schools are encouraged to use them as needed, right? To use them based on like the needs of the local building. Can you talk to me about like when, if ever, those wiggly job titles have been reviewed, when, if ever, they might be reviewed to understand what they're doing? And like, I guess, like, what, do we have a plan to like understand what those roles are, what people are doing in them? And like, how they fit in to your view, right? Like, I know that right, of course, you're not thinking about like, what is this one school doing with this one thing? It's not your job. But like at a certain point, there has to be like a connection between how we list people by their job titles and what they're doing, like there ought to be. And as I'm saying it, I'm thinking about all of the people whose job titles are custodial and food service, who are instrumental in students' educational experiences. So like, I don't know what to say about that, but like, we have these wiggly jobs where people are on teacher contracts who do all different kinds of work. And I don't get the sense from the emails I'm getting that we have a clear sense of like what those are. So can you talk to me about like whether those have ever been like assessed or analyzed or audited? If they, and if you're thinking about it.
Definitely, I'm thinking about that. It came up in conversation today about some of the job titles that sit in the teacher unit that don't necessarily have a, and it was specific to the certification. There are jobs that sit in the teacher unit that you can have any certification, right? And their title doesn't reflect that, you know, it's not a grade 3 teacher,
Right.
something like that. So we definitely, that's on our radar to look at that and to better understand, you know, who has, you know, who's directing that work. Is it school-based? You know,
Right.
do you have more leverage? Can you convert this into something else? You know, that allocation fits into a lot of our budget conversations. Can it be converted from this into something else and still meet all of the components of our instructional design work?
Yeah, I think that seems needed. Can you talk to me a little bit about, and like, again, maybe like in your role, right? Like you're not thinking about an individual school, and I think that's right. But I'm also thinking about how vastly different an employee's experience is at one school versus another. To what extent are you trying to understand that and make moves with that? I know that we've worked on making sure that schools with higher needs get the subs that they need and all that stuff. So can you just talk a little bit about what's happening with that?
I mean, that's definitely something that we're, you know, that we think about, like senior leadership thinks about that. It's part of the workbook process. It's part of, you know, that instructional design, working cross-departmentally. Schools, you know, they do have some autonomy, but we also, you know, have job descriptions and want to make sure that those align with the work. And you know, having that ability to convert those positions, you know, a lot of times if you can't, you know, for instance, if you have a cross-categorical teacher position that you aren't able to fill, you could convert that into a different special education support position.
Right, to SAs or something. In general, when schools want to convert allocations or FTE, do you think that's like a good thing or like an indication that something's not going well, or totally neutral, depends on the circumstance?
It's
Okay, it's circumstance. Totally.
And you know, we want to
Sometimes good, sometimes bad.
We want to trust that the principal and the associate superintendent and, you know, that side of the house understand that work, and that's why they're making that request.
I understand. Okay, that helps me understand. My last question is about Cornerstone. I heard you talk about the like professional growth videos and that kind of thing. Are they getting much use? Like, do we know how?
It is very underutilized.
Okay. And then I guess my other question is like, is there, I feel like I always ask this question, is like, how do you and your team work with this team and the other thing? But like, we have such robust people working on professional development instructionally. Is that something that you're collaborating on? I know that Cornerstone's not like a school's HR thing, so I wouldn't
Right.
expect them to be specific, but I'm just curious, like, if that's part of our professional development vision, or if this is sort of just like a bonus from our subscription to the software.
Some of it is a bonus to our subscription to the software, but we do record quite a bit of our professional development. There are things that get assigned to all staff at the beginning of the year.
Bloodborne
Sure.
pathogens.
Yeah, we're definitely doing that as we're going into workbook season. We were able to assign some pre-work to all of the principals so that
And that's stuff that you developed, that is like loaded into Cornerstone and then pushed out?
the district,
Yeah,
cross-departmentally have developed those resources.
cool,
So those are not the those are ones that we have developed.
right on. Okay, those are all of my questions. Congratulations again on those amazing fill rates.
It takes a team of.
Congratulations to all on those amazing fill rates.
Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, I'm toggling between 3 different presentations. Toggling between last year's presentation, the year before that's presentation, the Whipley recommendations and such. So my questions are around, so each bullet point that was like kind of presented, from my understanding, it's just an update of where we're at, or is it like the actual plan that we're going to be using for retention and recruitment? Is that?
It's both.
Okay. The reason why I asked that is because I know that we've asked for like more comprehensive plan in retention. And although like these strategies are seem great, and I guess I was looking for more substance to like, I guess more in-depth analysis in them. So I'm thinking of like, I know I've asked this question about like, how are we using exit interviews? How are we taking in consideration of that information as we are looking to do, hiring and retention? Like, how does that play out as people are leaving? Or even, I know we're hearing a lot more of like today about like why people are coming, someone recruited or someone recommended the great benefits and things like that. But I'd be interested in, as people are leaving the district, retiring or just separation, like why? And so that'd be great as we kind of hear those kind of things of like how that kind of factors into our plans around that. I know I wanted to also ask, I know in the past couple of years, that when we are hiring folks, the hiring process has been very cumbersome, has been long. People have waited multiple months on, and I know that part of the reason why was one, part of the reason why, as we were told, was one, you all didn't have a full team, and 2, there just needed to be more support because you didn't have a full team. So I guess that my question is like, is that process between someone being, submitting an application, getting an interview, then being offered a position, like, is that lessened in time? Or is that still pretty elongated as it has been for some time?
We have definitely made strides in making that shorter. And we want to benchmark against, 45 days or fewer days, 30 days for some positions. One of the things that we're working on is having a communication plan and the touch points with candidates who might have something that is preventing their onboarding from going through faster. So if they're, a background check might cause their onboarding experience to be paused, but we want to make sure that they have a reach out and a touch, and that they know that it could extend the time that it takes them to get an official start date.
Okay, so we would correlate possibly the time that it has taken to hire someone to then increase numbers in hiring folks, or is that not a correlation that we can necessarily meet? So like if it takes longer to hire people, then the number may lull in how many people we're hiring versus like if it takes us a shorter time to hire people, we can actually get people into our classrooms and in our quicker. It allows us to then have higher ratio of staff. And maybe I'm not making the right correlation, but
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that I understand that, but one of the things that we definitely want to look at as we have become more versed in what Cornerstone can offer us is like how many days between each of the steps, and can we reduce those, and what are our pain points, and making sure that we identify that.
If I could interject, Member Pearson, I think that, I don't know, had a district around us or even outside of us not have the need to hire a similar position. So with an elongated hiring process, that person may have applied in 4 districts. And if ours is taking longer, they might have 1, 2 offers, or we get out an offer. So I think it's important that we get through the process, get an offer out, a good offer, a comprehensive offer, so that we can land that person if that's who we desire.
yeah, I think analytically a lot of times. So as we're like thinking about what plans, you know, for me, when I see the Whitfleet, because I was here on the board when that came out, and even before then in 2022, and such, it's pretty comprehensive as to what the response is. I know we've received pretty comprehensive responses for HR when it comes to like when Dr. Henderson first came on and that. And so for me, I just am looking for something a little more comprehensive so that like as we are also talking to the community, we can say these are like what we're doing. And I think it just is like good practice. Not to say that this is not coming, but I'm happy that our vacancy rate has lessened since I've been on the board. And I'm excited to see how some of our programs definitely kind of help with future retention and recruitment. So that's it for me.
All right, thank you. The main questions I have are centered around, you know, what are we doing for students in schools who may need the most support to put the most experience and qualified staff there to support them. So a lot of the metrics and stats that we did for staff turnover and staff demographics, I'm wondering what that looks like.
Where's my phone?
Sorry. I'm wondering what that looks like for our Title I schools and our TSI schools, ATSI schools. And if there's anything specific we could do to support those schools and students through board policy or board investments, or ways that we can help support administration in that endeavor and those schools in specific.
So a few different thoughts on that question. First, you know, I think it's important that we discuss this in a few different ways. One would be to look at the number of years experience of staff in the TSI Title I schools. But we also have to qualify that with not just experience, but also effectiveness as well. And really look to make sure that we're not just saying just because you've been in the district for this amount of time means that you're the best fit, either for the assignment in that school or sometimes for that school in general. So I do think we have to look at a number of different data points. I'm not saying one is more important other, but I do think that will contribute. And especially sometimes when we look at the racial and linguistic diversity of staff as well. So.
Thank you. And the last question, and understand if you don't have any insights to share right now, but as we continue to invest in the grow your own efforts, what are specific ways that those staff need support as they go through that pipeline, whether it be through policy or the budget or things in between?
I'd like to turn to Jen Shepke and have.
Okay.
You update? Sure. Thank you, Jen.
So in terms of specific support in.
I apologize.
You're fine. It kind of varies by what programs you're talking about, right? So, for example, the Grow Your Own to Associate Degree program is 2x2 program. So it's gonna be folks who are working on their associate degree and then going on to their bachelor degree. Working 20 hours a week and then taking coursework for the remainder part of their work week for 4 continuous years. It's a lot. Having coaching, having principal support for those folks, having access to schedule are all really big things. Some of that could mean how their roles are allocated within the school. Things like that could be helpful to allow them flexibility to do coursework and reaching their goals. And I'll say of our current cohort in Grow Your Own to Associate Degree, cohort 1 has 19 people in it. 90% of those people are people of color. So a majority are first generation folks as well. So looking at the cohort funnel that we have for cohort 2, of the nearly 70 people that I've talked to about that program, over 80% are people of color. Majority are also first gen. So that cohort will be smaller, obviously 70. We don't have that many. But it is a really great wealth of a program to diversify our staff. And we'll see how it pays out. You know, it's a long game plan to see how that goes. The ALSI program, which is a master's program to help SEAs become special ed teachers. That's a 2-year program. Continuing the mentorship with that program is really important. It's critical for first year teachers, as you know, to have mentorship and having the space and capacity for that to happen. And just continuing opportunities for folks in that program to be able to work as an SEA in the first year to learn the ropes and get some of the coursework under their belt. It really has been helpful. We started doing that in cohort 4. And that's really expanded the success we've had there. In the principal pipeline program, the ELP, having the ability to continue that program. So we have a bench of folks who are ready to be principals, coupled with some really great coaching and support, not only in that year when they're taking their classes, but what does it look like to support them going forward? And along with all of our folks doing that. So coursework is great, but continued support and keeping the cohort together has been, seems like a really great opportunity.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm really encouraged to hear that, you know, we're not just focused on as big a cohorts as possible, but the quality of support and mentorship we're able to provide.
If I could add, I'm one person, and it's a lot of, when we get the Grow Your Own to Associate program up to speed, where it's a flying cohort, it could be 80 people. So, I mean, that's 20 people per ish, right? Per cohort as they're going through. That is more than I can handle. So that's just thinking about that, because that's in addition to the other things that I do in my job. So having people or another staff member or someone who is culturally competent, who can help support our folks as they're going through, who can be that touchstone, that point of contact, who, if something's going wrong in that week and they have someone to talk to right away to help figure out and fix. And that's a lot of what the Grow Your Own work is to be that ready-made person who's high touch, who's there all the time, who supports you. And that's a critical component of all the Grow Your Owns.
Thank you. All right, that's my question. Anything else from anyone? Thank you. To move forward.
All right, thank you very much, Jennifer, Angela, and Jen. There's great questions, board, great dialogue ongoing as well. I don't think we're done. In human resources, it's the department that is really essential in touching every employee in our district. So it's something that we want to be known to be really good at, always improving, and more than anything, communicating our results to our entire community. It impacts us all. Next, we're going to start talking about 25-26 already. I'll turn it over to Bob to watch what we're doing today for our budget.
All right, thanks. Yeah. So we want to start with kind of just given the context. I envision a process fairly similar to what we did 24-25 budget. We are a little bit earlier and not ready to dive right in with some of the projections, mainly because we are in an odd numbered year, which is the first year of the 2-year biennial state budget. So although we normally can try to take a shot at what our enrollments are, what we don't know are some of the laws related to both revenue limits. Right now, based on Governor Evers' veto from last budget, we have 325 per member revenue limit increase. That's currently being litigated by the courts. Whether that stays or not is a critical projection revenue. The second Friday in January count was this past Friday. It will take us 2 weeks to get together a number that we can kind of drill down by school level and see if our trends from the third Friday in September enrollment, which was up from last year. And we have a slide on that a little bit later to put us in context. And we're getting in the enrollment reports from our partners, Vanderwall and Associates this year. I'll say, as I've been saying for a year and a half now, the enrollment projection models are based on birth rates, and our birth rates are lower. So the models usually project us to be declining in enrollment when we know that's not our reality. So we're going to continue to spend a little bit more time looking at the details of that in terms of enrollment projections. Those are critical. That's a critical number for us to have. And then finally, just the state of affairs with the state. Governor Evers will likely introduce his budget later next month in February. And then the legislature, if they have done what they've done recently, they'll throw that out and start building their own. But we'll be monitoring those kind of conversations as we roll into May and June. But it'll give us a time to start putting together some, like I said, the enrollment projections and where we're going to be at, and make some assumptions that 325 is going to stay in there. And we'll get into some other slides in terms of some of the more specifics. So as I said, we'll go over some of the strategic goals in terms of budget goals that we'll have for 25-26. We're right in the middle of those. As I said, I see us continuing some of the initiatives we started this year, low class sizes, focusing our resources where we believe we need it the most in terms of literacy and math skills. Already talked about our assumptions for revenues and enrollments. We're in the heart of coming out with some workbooks for 526. Those is the process we do as staff, working with buildings and department heads and the administrative team. Taking a look at rolling forward our enrollments from this year to next year, and then coming up with allocation model based on the board's class size policies, including the smaller class sizes that we have for kindergarten and first grade, and the additional staff we provided for. So we're right into that. We're going to get meeting on some draft numbers this week, and then take it to Joe and the administrative team next week, likely to start trying to push that forward. Okay, the next one is compensation strategy. WERC usually comes around the end of this month, January, in terms of our number. The number that I'm referring to is the 4.12%. That was the CPI that we used for negotiation, under current law. What that number is likely to be, it's unclear, but the way, the CPI has been going, and again, WERC only put out that number at the end of this month. I'm guessing it's gonna be about 3%, right? CPI has been a lot less, each of the last 12 months. So it's likely to be right in that 3% range. Again, a comparable to 4.2%, in terms of raises for 24. Okay, and then, as always, the healthcare and budget negotiation, we talked about, the operations work group meeting in, November in terms of our strategies there, what goes ahead. So if we go to the next slide, Jesse, in terms of the timeline, this is the graphical display, but don't like words upon words and bullet points. I've learned to love the graphical display timelines. This is good work of Jen Shepke, who we just heard from and left. This is all Jen's work. I just update some of the things that we say in here. But we are in essence right on the timeline in terms of what we need to do. Like I said, that WERC number that'll come out at the end of this month is a critical piece, and then enrollment projections. We and then that goes through like we always do, the exciting stuff with the state budget. You know, our fingers crossed that they'll have their work done at the state level, May or June. I would assume, since normally is the case, the big decisions on school finance, special education aid reimbursement, general aids revenue limits will happen at the end and not the beginning. So likely one won't get answers till June, but hopefully they'll have agreement and everyone's getting along and it'll happen early. But that doesn't usually happen that way. And then so we'll have again a preliminary budget in June to vote on. We'll have the draft one in May again, and then work throughout the summer and then come together again as usual in October for the final board. The next slide, Jesse. Some members on the board, when they used to be in different roles, had a hand in developing our current equity tools and our guidance tools. We'll continue to utilize those resources that are there. The links are for those tools that we shared. Purpose of time and keeping us moving forward. I'm going to roll to the next slide where we talk about our budget vision, which is really the vision is based on the 3 strategic goals that we continue to operate. We talked a little bit about this already, but I'd like to start with investing in our priorities to address the racial and linguistic, socioeconomic inequities, the opportunity gaps that exist. Continue to make decisions to close them. We're well on our way to continuing to invest in our facilities for sustainability. Work the board did this past year, and obviously with the $507 million referendum question, it's full speed ahead. We continue to align our resources, the changes of Title I dollars, focusing on the high schools that were eligible based on economically disadvantaged student populations. And then, of course, our continual work to focus our resources on issues of equity, focusing on the schools, not only with our teaching staff, but with resources that are available to close some of those opportunity gaps. And then the next slide talks about our budget goals for 25-26, which is really the same goals we had in 24-25. Thankfully, the considered total compensation is a much shorter orange line on the bottom because of the support the community gave us in terms of the $100 million for operating referendum over the next 4 years. This year, 30 million in 25-26, followed by 20 and 20. So we've got the resources and revenue base, and from us finance guys, when you talk about staff retention and recruitment, anybody that's supporting their schools by $100 million operating referendum sends a message that we value our staff, including our teachers, and we have the resources to back that up. That's a big deal. There are still many districts that failed in November and are looking at going this spring, and so those are the districts when one is looking at, do I want my family into this community? Do they support their public schools? Our community continues to support us, which I think is a really important strategy. One that people continue to talk about. It's very positive. All right, I'll just take a pause here. Anything about the goals and our strategies and our plan moving forward?
Board Member Vandermillen?
Yes, I know I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but I'm gonna ask you the same thing I've been asking for a long time. And that is the board going to be able to work and create the workbook so that we can see the staffing inequities ahead of time?
That's not been our practice.
I know.
I mean, clearly, we have policies where we staff our schools based on the board's class size policies, which is what we're going through right now to make sure we're using our resources and working to be compliant with the board's policies. That's what we met on it today, and I'll be over next 2-3 days with Cindy and Carletra's teams. But that's usually been our practice.
I just think it would, you have 7 of us. I think it would be maybe beneficial to collaborate on that because to be 100% honest, a lot of times we've got to go back and we may have to anyway to add sections or delete sections, that I understand that, but I think that we could actually help the backlog if there is one. I'm just offering it as support, not control. I want that to be made clear.
I appreciate that, Board Member Vandermillen. I really would prefer to position the board to be more in that governance role, especially when it comes to staffing. However, if there are policy changes, if there are ways that we can distribute resources that would have an impact and would be the direct result of your role, we'll bring that information forward.
That would be great.
It's been my experience though with our staffing guidelines that those are set in place. If there are policies that drive them, that's where our work should be as a board.
What worries me is when we go over the number, not when we go under, but when we go over. And then have to fix it at the last minute. I worry about that.
Yeah, and in a dynamic situation where we have 26,000 students and 6,000 staff, and you all know the development going on right now.
Oh, God,
We
yeah.
still get emails where leases are now starting in new buildings. And
Yeah.
it has an automatic impact. So this is going to be something that we're going to have to develop some really good systems in place to accommodate for some of what I believe are going to be really rapid changes in our city and community.
Man, one thing too, just when you say go over, I just want to be mindful that one of the things that we do, even starting now between Bob, Cindy, Carletra, is it myself think about the unallocated pot that we use and making sure like we are monitoring class sizes. So when things are over, we are adding already before. So we're constantly monitoring those starting now all the way throughout the year. So I just want to be mindful that we're constantly monitoring the class size.
I think the reason why, if I may offer a quick explanation. My first year on the board, different special ed director, board voted to put $1 million in special ed to help out a troubled school. And the special ed director decided to keep it in savings and never used it, nor did they tell the board till it came out in open record. So I do worry about that. It was 2017, 2018.
Well, if you tell me to spend $1 million, Board Member Vandermeer, we'll spend $1 million.
I'm not planning on that, Bob. You know much better on finances than I ever will. It just, I wanted to explain my cautions and my reticence on said issue.
But I think it is important. These are projections looking forward. We've rolled forward our hard announcement. Friday, it said second Friday in January, the official take count was just this past Friday. It'll take us a couple of weeks. Years ago, we had 25 unallocated positions in 23, 24. We left those in the budget. We left them in the base. And then we added this year in 24, 25, 20 additional unallocated, which are now utilized and allocated out to the schools. So I would expect that's one of our strategies is to take a look at projections, meet the board's class size policies, and then identify an unallocated pool to address just those issues that we're talking about. Now, whether that's 20 or 25 or what that number ends up being, that's kind of one of the pieces where you're moving your revenues available and what kind of latitude you have and how confident we are in our enrollment projections, and that all leads to that.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. Thank you for indulging me in that. That's all I have, Chair.
Well, thank you. Board Member Nichols?
Yes, so for these goals, Bob, well, there's a couple things that I guess this is not well thought out. So, to say that. Because we will be going through a new strategic planning process. I know that you said that the budget goals also align to kind of our current strategic framework. I'm not sure as we go through that process and then kind of start the 25-26 school year. If we might have a different sense of priorities. And I'm not saying that that should show up exactly in the budget goals. But I guess I'm wondering, and this might be for
Great
you,
questions.
Dr. Gothard, how will strategic planning and the idea of like a new or a sense of direction and priorities come together with this budgeting process?
That's a great question, and I think that I'll start by saying that it's going to be done in phases. And it'll be some good discussions, I think, for the strategic planning steering committee. Thank you, Dr. Craig. You know, for us to discuss as well. There to be where I think we need to be the most thoughtful about is long-range commitments that we make. And during strategic planning, that's the last thing that you want to do. You want to make sure you get it right and that you can sustain those efforts. So I think a lot of scrutiny needs to be done, you know, from the very beginning. What are our long-term commitments? Are they still the right ones? Are they aligned to our current strategic thinking? And if they're not, that's where we have to make some decisions around where do we want to prioritize our funding. So I still think that the idea of priorities will be really important, whether it's the current strategic plan, the future strategic plan, future, right?
Right.
And
So-
it's always going to be based on what is the most important right now, based on our data, based on what we're hearing from the community.
Okay. So I appreciate that. So this idea of having a focused set of priorities, I don't know if they'll be aimed at multi-year investments, but a focused set of priorities definitely seems like maybe a way to think about the 25-26. I don't know if, I guess I don't know if you're looking for feedback on these goals or not. So I just wanted to bring that up, the idea of strategic planning, the budget development and priorities. And then the other thing that is standing out to me is we just had a whole presentation from Human Resources on, it's not just the compensation, it's compensation and benefits that is making us highly competitive. And so when I look at that orange goal right now, it says consider total compensation steps plus base wage. So like the benefits piece of compensation isn't included, and it feels like the benefits component is going to be an equally important part of our budgeting. Right?
That's a great point. And I'll just, in terms of my, can add benefits, but in terms of my thinking, the decisions we talked about and we were agreement on November was that we were gonna maintain our benefits package, that there weren't gonna be any changes in terms of taking anything off the table, that we're gonna fund it for another year and then do the full RFP process of how. So, but I agree, benefits is very important. And
So these goals aren't necessarily goals of the entire budgeting process. They're the things that we're spending the most energy on, or how would you define the budget goals?
yeah, part of our 25-26 budget is twofold. I talked about the timing of the state budget, which happens over 2 years.
Yeah.
But the other part is Dr. Gothard's view of a new strategic plan for the district and the process. How soon can that happen? So I think I really view us, to me, is maintaining the initiatives we started in 24-25. Additional staffing at kindergarten, lower class sizes at kindergarten grade, maybe a discussion of lowering class sizes in some other areas, but for the most part, the wages, the benefits that we know are coming, it wouldn't be, in my mind, until we have a better sense of strategic planning differently or strategic goals that are different than what we have. Many newer ideas until we can get into this process. Cause we'll have time, remember, we'll do a preliminary budget in June and then we can make amendments and do changes throughout the summer before we vote on the vote. So if there's an opportunity, right, to do more, we can. It'll be obviously talking about, I think our revenues are key and what we can afford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think I might need to revisit the November conversation, but as I'm looking at the goals, like for instance, the one about reduce the number of sections below minimum of the board's class size policy. Well, we started that work already. So to me, it feels like the goal for 25-26 isn't necessarily to reduce the number of sections, it's to maintain that. That feels like, or to sustain it to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
And
To me, that I've spent a couple hours today.
yeah,
I think implementing that, right? And that is doing just what we're doing today. These are our allocations for 24-25. We've rolled forward projections by school building. What is the board's class size policy? Minimum and maximum.
Yeah.
Just the workbook for 25-26 to reflect, that, which is what we did here. And to me.
okay.
That's like, me, that's the real, how do I implement this? Doing that right there, making our assumptions on enrollments. And then maintaining the board policy and the minimum and maximum going through, right? This school had 3 sections based on the enrollment projections. We think it's gonna need 4 or 2 this year. And we have gone. Last after going through that, that's what we're meeting on this week with Cindy's team, our lectures team. And kind of refining that initial first draft on 25-26 workbooks, which really moves allocations. I mean, in terms of identifying, based on our enrollment projections, where do we think this is gonna go next year?
Okay. Thank you.
I gotta say, I mean, that's why it's.
One last quick comment, just to help us frame. Cause I think how it all seems overlapping. So much of our budget commitments are investment tied to staff models that we have. And as we think about strategic planning, it isn't so much, many more times it's what are those individuals going to do? How are we going to get the people that we have? What is the PD or the resources they need? So it isn't so much it's the directive, it's the goals that strategic drive. So, and again, my point in saying that is that, what 80% of our budget is. It's very little for us to really consider for strategic planning.
Yeah.
Compared to the whole.
Thank you. Is that it?
For now.
We're good.
Right. We're rolling to revenue streams. So, just a refresher, talk a little bit about revenue limits, our operating authority, and then the state categorical aid. Those are really the big 3 things that I need to keep my focus on. I mentioned the 325 per member, the veto from Governor Evers' last budget. It's being reviewed by the Supreme Court right now in terms of is that a legal veto or not. That'll dictate what happens in the budget conversations, but we're assuming it's going to be 325. Already talked about the successful operating revenue exceeding that we have this year and the next 3 years. And then finally, the per categorical aid is $742 per member, per revenue limit member. It's a separate categorical money that we can spend. It's been $742 since 1920. Whether the legislature increases it, I can't imagine they would consider decreasing it. But that's something that we'll be watching. So it's a hunk of revenue that means a whole lot to us. It's one time, it's here, we use it. It's not necessarily in the base because it's contingent on the authorization every 2 years. But it is a big stream of revenue. All right, the next slide is revenue limits, they're 3-year rolling averages. That's just a reminder. So we're always dealing in revenue limit world with 3 years. So are up in September of 2024. It's in there, but it'll take 2 more years to fully realize that increase in terms of the one count. The next slide is just is confirmation that our numbers are staying the same. They could change in terms of 2024, what we reported third Friday. Normally they do change as we continue to revise and get more information. Work through that. Our registrar, Fatima, and her team could make changes to that. Independent charter schools can revise their enrollment counts on these third Fridays. So I'm always just monitoring that to make sure that they're still the same. They are still the same. DPI ran projections for 25, 26. They didn't have those spreadsheets until now. I'll work with those for February and the months that follow. So our enrollment continues to be up in terms of revenue limit purposes, which is critical for our revenue pictures. All right, the next slide is 3-year rolling averages going back to 11 and 12. It's the timeline I like to look at because it talks, I mean, you can see in 11 and 12, we were 25,700. We went up to the 27,500 and then went back down, but our enrollments in 24, 25 are higher than what we were 12 years ago, higher than what we were 12 years ago, which means our capacity in our schools, total number of students we're serving hasn't changed drastically over time. It's down compared to what it was 5 and 6 years ago. But we have always been a system that serves 25,000. Who we are. Okay, the next one is my exciting one. It shows the orange line is a revenue limit percentage increase, which is just over 10% with the successful passage of the referendum in November. The blue line is CPI. So when the blue line is above the orange line, which you can see it has happened the last few years before our successful passage, we need to make up that base revenue, which is what the successful referendum did this fall. And so we'll continue to monitor that, look at that as base building revenues go forward. But again, it's a good sign of strong fiscal numbers in terms of revenues being available. The next slide is just me updating the revenue limit projection in terms of the successful passage. The 4 kind of big areas of revenue under state law is our base revenue, which is that big section of blue. The gray numbers are total recurring exemption. So you can see the 23-24 recurring number, which was $10 million. That becomes part of the blue in 24-25. Then that gray section in 24-25 is at 30 million new revenues this year, but it'll become part of the blue base in 25-26. So this is where we're seeing an increase in sustainable revenues to continue to meet our increased expenditures in terms of competitive wages, in terms of competitive benefits as a dollar amount. As Dr. Goddard mentioned, our staff are 81% of our budget. So we need revenues to continue that process. Then the total non-recurring exemptions are always, for us, between $7 and $10 million, primarily driven by the private voucher school program and a couple of other smaller non-recurring exemptions. And so those are exemptions where we have revenue limit authority 1 year, but then they go away and don't carry into our base the following year. And then you have to see what they're going to do. Look forward into 25-26. Very positive what this is. Okay, the next one talks about our aid piece. So in revenue limits and in school finance, we have our revenue limit calculation, which is really based on enrollments. Then we get our state aid piece. This year was a huge, just over 60, almost $61 million. And then usually at this point in time are guessing what is the state going to do in terms of appropriating dollars for general school aids. But all indications are for the next few years thereafter, we are going to be in current law, which is called 85% hold harmless, which means we're entitled to $50 million. We know current state law, current law, we get 85% of the $60 million guaranteed. So in the past, this has been a big question mark for us, but we know now, unless the legislature changed the law, which they could, that's their job, we should be getting 50 million in state aid. What you can see from this graph, 50 million is considerably more than what we would have gotten prior to this year in terms of state commitment. What that means on the revenue limits are, we can tax this. It's less of a tax impact this next fall. I having that 50 million state aid. It'll buy the property. Just good news for us. Then the next slide is still what we are in terms of that combination of state aid and controlled levies. Reminder, you heard me say this before, I haven't said it for a while. We're 90% funded by property taxes under revenue limits, about 10% of state aids. That is because of the relative wealth based on property values and how much we spend in terms of our cost, our shared costs compared to other districts. All right, so that's my rundown of the budget. Any questions on that?
Board Member Muldrow.
Thank you so much. I am curious about kind of where we'll be at going into 2025, 2026 as it relates to our fund balance. And I am curious about our ability to explore as a board a policy that would allow for our fund balance to be between 12 and 24% versus between 12 and 15%, given the fact that over the last few years, we have consistently been over our policy in terms of our fund balance. And I think that that's a good thing. We want to actually strive towards having a lot of flexibility and mobility as a district in terms of our short-term borrowing. I want to start there.
Sure. Our fund balance policy is one of the policies that are scheduled modification. So it's a perfect good timing question. We have been working with our CPA audit firm. They're going to present to you at the January board meeting. We usually have a conversation every year asking them what, based on the markets and based on us, and what are you recommending? This is what our policy is now. I think Whiffley's comfortable saying they would prefer our minimum fund balance policy goes higher than 12%, probably more in the 15 to 20%. I'm going to caution you though, without this successful operating referendum, we're nowhere near that minimum fund balance policy. And from a bond rating perspective, if you have a policy, really need to meet that policy, or it's a negative, a red mark against you in terms of bond ratings. We want good bond ratings because it's cheaper to sell general obligation bonds.
So I just want to make sure if you're out there listening though, people understand our fund balance is over the 15% threshold. That is our policy right now.
Yes.
Were we to make that 15% threshold the bottom, we would still be meeting that policy as of right now. And the advice we're getting is that we should be between, our bottom should be between 15 and 20. What should the top be?
That's a good question. I think that's open. I want to spend a little bit more time kind of running the numbers and seeing what we think it would be, which I haven't done yet. But yeah, that's what it would take.
Okay. I do think because right now our top is 15%, to shift that to be our bottom is a significant change. And I do agree though that we want to be able to kind of leverage the really strategic decisions that have been made in partnership with the board and the administration to make sure our community has reasonable expectations of us as fiscal stewards of the district. I want to talk a little bit about how our investment in renewable energy is going to speak to this process over the course of the next year. So we have a goal of, being a more sustainable, more renewable, more efficient district. And there is cost savings associated with embracing renewable energy. How are we factoring in that long-term work, and how are we using our next budget as a launch pad for that work to meet that 2045 goal?
I'll let Scott talk a little bit about when he gets to the next part in terms of what we're doing, planning on the 10 facilities that have just been approved as part of the $507 million facilities referendum. Two things that I want to point out on the savings, because there are, as we move to green technology. our energy costs are gonna go up because we added HVAC to our comprehensive high schools and we added square footage. And so when you look at our month-to-month utility costs, they are gonna go up because we did that, which we needed to do that. Now,
Can I add something specific
Sure.
about that? Did we add geothermal HVAC to our high schools in our last referendum? Or do we only have geothermal as an investment that was made by the board prior to the referendum? And so we updated after we had the sustainability goal with a non-sustainable HVAC or a non-renewable HVAC after the board had made that resolution.
yes, yes,
Non-renewable.
yeah, we used our ESSER funds to accomplish in terms of the cost for the comprehensive high schools. There were some decisions that were made. I will say, geothermal is a huge piece of our most recent referendum for the 507, and Scott's gonna get into some of that plan. That's all part of every site, so what's gonna dictate that, Scott will talk about it, is the testing and the drilling site, right? But if the sites allow geothermal, that's what we're moving towards.
Is there a reason why we opted out of geothermal for the high school sites?
Some of it is participating with the geofuel.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Now there's new technology that could open up for the future.
Mhm.
But current space that was there, not available in some of the schools.
I find that to be a little counterintuitive because the school that we have geothermal at is West High School. And West High School is our most landlocked school in comparison to East or La Follette or Memorial, which have,
On the ground as well.
okay,
Geology of the ground.
okay. So it's really specific to the location and not necessarily kind of the land that is available. So are we saying long-term that those schools are just incompatible with geothermal?
No.
Okay. I appreciate that, and understanding that we'll see an increase in energy funds related to that investment at our schools and that specific technology we embrace. I have a curiosity related to HR and how it will impact our budget going into 2026, which is how many of our educators are eligible for retirement. And how do we factor that in or anticipate, given trends, what that means for staffing our district and kind of what that means for the shift in compensation, as I would imagine kind of our veteran educators who are going out are often replaced by newer or younger or less experienced educators who are salaried differently.
So we definitely look at all of our employees who are at the age of retirement so that we can do some projections on those over the last few years. We've seen pretty small cohorts of retirees. Last year, it was under 60 who retired across all employee units. It generally ranges about 100 to 125 retirees per year. But we have to do some additional analysis on how that is impacting the budget. But we are aware that it is something that we need to add and do projections on that.
Okay, I look forward to learning more about that. I have some serious curiosities around the kind of implications of that. And if there's opportunities related to our staffing model that can be kind of embraced in relationship to a variety of areas. My next questions are specific to how our investments in instruction show up in our budget in 2025, 2026. I've asked for this for a long time. I would really like to have an analysis of how mixed aged classrooms show up in our budget and the benefits of those from an instructional standpoint, as well as from a standpoint related to resources. I can appreciate that we wouldn't have that information right now, but I would love to see that going into the conversation about 25, 26. Our investment in math. I think we are all pretty aware of what our test scores as a district look like. I think there's been a very strategic effort to focus on literacy. We've done things like hire literacy coaches. I'm curious if we're planning to staff math differently in order to produce different results related to math, both in terms of demographic success and you know, kind of the gender implications that have been recognized as a gap throughout our district. But also just overall in terms of our young people's academic success and their ability to make gains in that area. And so I'm curious about what investment looks like beyond curriculum in terms of staffing and supporting our students in the area of math specifically. I think that's it for my questions. Thank you so much, Chair Castro.
Any others? All right, I'm gonna move on.
Okay, we are going to now turn it over to, again, thanks to the incredible support from our community. And turn it over to some exciting updates on our Referenda 2024 $507. Scott Sheehan.
Take a 2-minute break, Chair.
Yeah, we can recess for 2 minutes. 6:53.
Okay, that's
I think I am.
Harvey got some?
Huh?
I thought
Are you
we-
found this one?
Shared it with Cindy, put it.
Okay, perfect.
very good.
We are currently on a recess. We'll be back in a few minutes. I'm sorry, interpreters. I know you. Yeah.
We can actually
We're coming.
Zoom right now. Just like,
Hang on, I'm ending it so we can hear her.
got it, sorry.
Thanks for the recess.
Okay, hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, yeah, so we receive a specific instructions or, yeah, that if we will be able to know if somebody was using us, we will continue, but if not, that we could leave. There is no way in Zoom, they are working on that, but there is no way up to now today in Zoom to know if somebody is using us or not. Is there a way that you can ask the question?
I don't.
Alguien, Alguien que esté en la reunión de Zoom está usando interpretación en español. Por favor, haga una señal con sus manos. Si alguien de nuevo está usando la interpretación o traducción simultánea en español.
Okay, thank you. I will let you know if I find out in the affirmative, no one is there in the next.
Okay,
Yeah,
I don't think
okay,
it's all our staff.
okay, so you don't think so?
On Zoom, on YouTube, who knows who's watching?
That's what I was
Yeah,
gonna say.
that's the thing, on YouTube, we don't know.
Just like have a comment.
I think comments are
There's no way to know.
off.
Okay, okay, so in order to be safe and respect language justice, I think that we are going to be continuing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so could you please reassign me as an interpreter? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happening, but it because it's live, we don't know if we're actually using it at home, people can be watching it. It's not like it's correct. So it's not-
Additionally, we shut off comments on that.
I go and see how many. One 50, another time, it was like, most of the time, like 6.
I think we're back.
Previous years.
Okay,
We want that one.
all right.
Just everything will look.
Let me know when.
I'm going to resume with referenda and facilities update.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Gothard and Board of Education. So we are, our last, next slide. So this is our last view of this graphic. This is the planning graphic. And now we're moving now into the execution side. We're doing design work, a lot of input from our teachers, our staff, our communities to build what is the future of Madison. So as you see here, we are in January. Expect 2 weeks from now to have the construction managers. And that finishes what I would call our pre-planning phase. And then moving into towards the execution phase. So as it follows up, we are doing 2 sites per year for the first 2 phases, and then we'll jump to 3 sites in the last phase. This is a 3-phased approach. Construction begins in 2026, meaning we break ground right around February of this next year. So 13 months to get the design finished complete of the first 2 schools. First 2 schools, Sherman Shabazz, or 4 schools, 2 sites, Sherman Shabazz, Blackhawk, Gompers. Again, breaking ground 13-ish months from now. Just a quick update as far as the status of the referendum. If you click that link, that would be great. So this is a kind of a specific agenda or specific to the referendum side. Again, it slides that we saw to our general groups earlier, where our population of our students are. Again, the 507 refers to the 7 particular school or 10 schools, 7 sites. And then some of the work accomplished. It's been a very, very, very busy month. All the RFPs were completed for our construction managers. We had our interviews prior to break. Went through a full vetting assessment. We had 5 candidates come on interview with us, and we come up with the finals, which will be put to the board in 2 weeks. In the meantime, our architects have been actively working in all of our sites. We've been field scanning all of our buildings in referendum minus Nana and Crestwood to do demolition work, understand what it takes to abate the layout of the buildings, to help us design the curriculum in the new spaces. So we see, well, how many classrooms do we have now? What does it look like? How does it feel? How are we adapting for when the new spaces come online? Have we accounted for this? Have we accounted for this? Have we accounted for what's going to be the future of Madison's learning? So it's a good blueprint of what we have and cross-reference of blueprints that we have and what those spaces look like. It's full 3-dimensional pictures. Here's how the classrooms are set up. Here's how things are kind of aligning with our teaching. In addition to that, we've done surveying. One ahead of me. Yeah. Surveying on the grounds, meaning looking at the slopes, where the schools are potentially going to be placed. How does it interact with traffic patterns? What are some features that we need to stand out sites?
So making sure that we don't have any hiccups and also looking at background of the ground, the topography, to make sure we don't have any issues coming into ready to build. Okay, so it's designed for the space that is there. So those are some of the stuff we've already completed. Next slide. There we go. So this is the 13th. We've already done a few of these from last week. So we've done some good program definition with a teaching and learning group. Spent a lot of time with associate principals, all this, the teaching and learning staff to help set guidance for what Madison schools look like for teaching, what the educational point looks like, and what are we setting our programming to? And also, what does it look like and what it might be? Later on that afternoon, we did a building visioning. So looking at, we had in this room probably 100 different pictures from what different architects have come up with. What do you like? How does it feel? How does it look to the community? How does this feel and shape to what our schools may or may not look like? So that was a good visioning session. So they get in a feel as administration, what it would look like, kind of leading into our next public sessions, which would be in March. Last Friday, we spent most of our day working on a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and technology piece. What do we want in our schools? What does the plumbing look like? What do the fixtures look like? What does geothermal look like, right? So we had great discussions. We had some people come in and give us a webinar on the future of geothermal, right? There are a lot of new technologies out there right now that are using smaller fields. So we can use and potentially adapt some of our other schools in addition to this new referendum. What can we do, right? You're kind of pulled in certain ways, but this has a whole new view for us. So we brought those folks in and envision what that looks like in our new space, right? We want all of our schools to have geothermal. We want all those schools to be the district goal of 2045, no greenhouse gas emissions, right? Electrification. Do any things to offset the energy pull from the grid, actually get back. Right, so that's a big drive for us. Upcoming, we've got a lot of heavy lifting in front of us. We're doing a very big building concepts workshop, building performance workshops. The building performance workshop is what type of materials are we using? Are they sustainable? Do they last 50 years? Are they lasting through thermal? Are they doing the things that we want our schools to last forever, not have to come back and be reworked? Are they taking stuff off the grid and is it not taking from the environment, right? How does it blend in and how does it be sustainable? February, we have a really, really detailed 2-day workshops with our teaching and learning folks after we started getting the concepts of the development, what they're looking and seeing is how do we really dive into what special education is going to look like? What do the physical education spaces, what does unified arts look like? And really looking at the spaces of each individual of our schools and as a program, as a district, what do we want to look like? We don't want to make a mistake. We want to make sure it's right and what the vision of education looks like 25 years from now, right? Can we make those projections? Can we make it a flexible space that we don't have to go back and reinvent it? And then the 21st of February, we'll be actually going to our sites at our schools with our staff at our schools, getting input. Like, what do they see? What are the challenges they want to see in the future? What these schools look like? How do they interact now? What are things that we can be better at? So those are our first phases of that. We'll be taking some benchmarking trips from other schools in the area, looking how they do sustainability. How do they interact with the new design concepts? And then in March, we'll have our first public input sessions. We'll be able to get some feedback. What is our community like? Here's our initial concept of what the space might look like and feel. Is it accessible to the community? Do they have a good feel of what it looks like? How does it fit their targets? And taking that information back and putting that into design scopes and giving the community what the feel they want, right? How does it fit, right? We don't want something that stands out. Each area is very unique in Madison. So we want to make sure it fits their dynamic, right? Nothing just stands out. Next slide, please. So our current timeline. Phase 1, obviously we talked about Shabazz, Sherman, Blackhawk, and Gompers. Break ground next year. Right now we're in the design phase. Got a lot of input. We've got some rough ideas what the sketching might look like. We're also working on the other 3 majors as well as we design. We're kind of making sure we incorporate the same feel of our district and be individualized for our space. Okay? Phase two will start breaking ground in 27. And then the last phase, we'd start of 20. Final occupancy of all of our referendum schools at the end or start of school year 29. So we have a lot of work ahead of us for the next 4 solid years. So very busy. Yes.
Chair, may I?
Yes.
What we did last referendum, which I found useful, you could choose to do it or not, is we had a group of disabled students and disabled parents go through and say which worked and which didn't, things like how high the ramp is, not just legally, but how high it actually affects a 10-year-old. For example, like they wanted to use at West, they wanted to use flagstone, which is a material that chips very easily and creates lovely little holes for canes and that. And one of the parents brought up, my daughter's cane will get caught every time. And I think that approach might also work again with this referendum on the grounds of people could say things and how it affects them, what's working, what isn't. For example, we learned at East that having every wall painted gold or purple, although it's absolutely gorgeous, is really hard for the visually impaired to be able to get around the building in all places. So having an accent wall and the rest worked easier, those kind of things, and I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, no, thanks for the input. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So this is the depiction of, next slide, the depiction of our projected schedules. You can see phase one, we're kicked off well, and now we're actually into phase two design currently as we're running. So it kind of extends to the left. Make sure we understand what the target is showing, but the move-in dates are set. First 4 schools will be set for in 7 to 28 school year. Slide. These are high level. If you saw some of the referendum, this hasn't changed a whole lot at this point. Some things are fluidly moving, but this is Sherman Shabaza's layout. Existing schools to the left, new proposed school and site is on the right. Blackhawk and Gomper, same thing. Front end, bottom is the existing school. We're going to go up to the north, play that topography lands up on the north side, and utilize that space that we have to the north. Existing school will become more green space once it's complete. Next slide. Again, Tokyo Ridge, back to the upper left, new schools or up on the upper left, and school on the right. Again, turn back in green space.
Wow.
Setups, Toki, next one, Cherokee, same thing. We're gonna use that hill, and the biggest thing for us, we've talked to our architects and our local groups, is we gotta use that hill as a nice feature. We can't lose the sledding hill. So we're gonna make sure we maintain some of those cool topography things we have at those school areas. And then the last one is Senate right now. It's kind of where we're sitting and laying out. Senate's back left of that property. And what is existing Senate will be placed with green space. And we talk about potential geothermal with some of the new technology that might be a space that we could use. It's up in that area. So that's long-term vision. How do we use that green space next to the building? Because mechanicals are on the back left side or the far left side. So we can tie in. So we've had some of those preliminary discussions about what does this look like when we convert it. So. That's just the referendum piece. Back to the original, if you could, please.
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Buildings. So has there been discussion yet about, I know we're in like we're at the beginning, of it all. Have we had any discussions about once those buildings do come down, then what does that space become? And so I'd be interested to kind of hear, because I'm thinking like, when I see the Senate building, right? That will take the existing soccer fields.
Yeah.
Right by the track.
We got to move green space, the green space.
Right. And so then the green space then shifts, but then the playground is right there. So I was just wondering like what conversations we're having around what does those spaces become once the material previous schools come down.
Yeah.
What does it be? Come.
Yeah, we are having those discussions. It's preliminary discussions, but our goal is to replace. So if we've taken X green space, it must be replaced. So reshaping and making sure the same features that are still there today are able to go back, and then how do we fix that? How do we add better features to it? Since we have the ability to do something with that ground.
Okay.
Moving into, it's being disturbed anyway, so might as well see what we can do.
Okay. That's it. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the slides that have the square footage for the new build. Can you just clarify for me what there's a right-hand column that shows like recommended square footage and that sits next to the thing? Is recommended what we're aiming for, or is that more like an industry?
It's a combination, right? So
Okay.
it says you should have this much teaching space for number of class sizes plus just normal open space. And then obviously we're looking at alignment of teaching class sizes, so we have to build in flexibility and capacity above that.
Okay.
We want to make sure there's expansion and growth for our buildings, not just, hey, we have 505, we designed it for 500.
Okay,
We
got
will
it.
get enough space to that, but we're also not going to overstretch and be unrealistic. So it's a rough number, and as we start to really define our curriculum, it'll really start to come into shape. Okay, this is what we currently need. Now, can we replicate or have swinging spaces, which then will modify that proposals?
Okay, great. And then for the gym, the one thing I notice is there's, this is on like almost all of the slides. There's the existing square footage for a gym. And then it says there's the standard.
For the number of children in the school and for the kind of what they have, the allotment of space, they are well undersized.
But it looks like that's true for almost all of these.
Most of them are with new curriculum and way it's set up.
Okay.
The walls are right up on the edges of courts. If you look at some of the design space, it is very condensed versus now you have spaces for walking, you have safety mats, you have other things that go in these bigger spaces.
Okay.
They're very tight according to standards.
So all of these kind of like recommendations around new parking spots, bigger spaces for classrooms, libraries, cafeterias, and the gym. There are these proposed increases in total square footage.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure.
I'll just add a little bit of the detail of what
Yeah.
the numbers are. So we had to, this is really preliminary planning, but we had to come up with what we thought each of the 10 buildings would be square footage. Because when we were estimating at 507, we did it school by school. We had to come up with square footage for each one of those buildings.
Okay.
To get what we thought a square footage would be, all the indices, geothermal, all the things that would be added on to get a 507.
Got it.
We had
Okay.
to come up with something, but it's totally open, right? I mean, if the folks say we want, a different size cafeteria or whatever, it would end up being.
Yeah.
There's flexibility once you stay within that 507.
Okay. Thank
you. Can move around.
I have a question for Chair.
Yep.
My question is, because this caused the debate of the last referendum, how is the money being spent among the schools and how are we making the decision? Because that caused a bit of kerfuffle last time.
Yeah. The 507 is, we had to come up with an estimate of each one of the 10 school sites, which is what these charts are showing. Saying that, there's complete flexibility among those 10 sites. We just can't go over 507, right? So I would say each site is unique of what we need to build, and that's gonna have a different price tag than site B.
Oh,
or
good.
Site.
I'm actually thrilled at that, because last time we gave each school the same amount and it.
It's not with this package.
Yeah, this isn't going to be that way. It can't be. It's different sizes, different enrollments, different spaces.
Yeah.
The one before, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say there's complexity to that representation in terms of how it's the same. Given
Well,
the fact that per student.
Well, it was supposed to be the same. Was it the same? Not in your life, and that's what I want to avoid happening. LaFollette got the short end of the stick in my opinion, but that's my.
No, there were adjustments made.
All right.
Right?
You can move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm biased.
Back to the original presentation. Yep. Yep, thank you. So we talked about the monthly report. Each month there will be a new report. It'll give us status of where we're at, how we're progressing, building it through the referendum. Construction manager selection, the board consent went through today for 2 weeks from now for the vote. And part of what we talked about in last meetings is revisiting the long-range facilities plan recommendation. So part of that is prioritization of critical needs of the long-range facility plan and the 10-year capital improvement plans. Next slide, we'll get into that a little bit. So as we had this slide last time, there are 35 schools that haven't been renovated to continue to need maintenance, and some of them much more dire need than others, depending on age and complexity and on the upkeep. We have all these budgets, and we have $25 million custodial support, all labor pieces, some minor mechanical pieces. We have $12.4 million facility maintenance budget, $8.2 million capital budget. Again, it's not a lot of money for all the schools that we have. We've got to be very strategic in managing how do we get through on a tight budget that we have. On an average week, we have about 340 work orders, and we have only 30 tradespeople to keep up with work orders across 78 square miles. Correct me if you're wrong, Dr. Gothard, I think we're 78 square miles across the district. So it's a lot of turf to cover. And you think about driving 10, 15, 30 minutes that takes out of a work day for fixing something that takes maybe, so you're losing efficiency times just by traveling. So we have to manage that very soon. Next slide. So what we've come up with, we have a project task force. So we have 2 dedicated folks that are spending around 60 hours a week, which is Nick Guerra and Angela Mass, developing a strategic template. What that means is looking at the long-range facility plan that came out with PRA. In addition to, we have a facilities index that resides on a set of spreadsheet, what's all the assets listed in every school. So we're taking every little bit of information that's in about 5 different databases and making it one complete system. Right, so we can track what's in Blackhawk Gompers, what's in this school, what's in that school, every single asset and piece, with an average of about 10,000 assets per school times 52 schools. What we're doing for that is also assigning grade level of any of the tasks and objects that are in there. Some schools need more needs from the long-range facility plan. It gets a D, it starts to raise priority. So we're putting an initial priority level to everything. And then also looking at, hey, let's get a work order created. So we can, when we're in the area, let's assign this and get it assessed, and we can fix it immediate, or if it takes long range planning to do so. Okay. So we've got 2 dedicated resources aligning all the goals. They're spending us about 60 to 70 hours a week building the template, right? This takes time to build if you do it right. So we don't have to go back and backtrack, right? Starting to build history of what's the parts, what do they do? Okay, next slide, and I'll go a little bit more. So while we're building this database, we're building the history. So we're bringing in the trades. And when's the last time you looked at something? What does it take to do this particular piece? What do you do with this, the left piece and the right piece? Right? Do you touch all 3 at the same time, or do something different? So it's getting deeper than just fix that, right? It's starting the assessment of, let's plan for replacement, or let's plan for correction. Right now we firefight. We're really, really good at firefighting. Firefighting costs double the money, and you do it triple the time. So we're getting above the weeds and starting to set path and forward, saying, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Tradesperson, here's how we're looking at this. When you're there, look at X, Y, and Z. We sign the work order to actually look at it, right? And we can say, hey, we're placing the sensor. It actually has a 6-month left. Let's change it to 5 and put it on it. To get from firefighting to preventative, our goal is to get predictive. And say, this is how we do, right? And getting folks to buy in. So part of when we get through our assessments and the schedules, obviously we have things that have immediate need. We're pulling out 3 trades. We're pulling out 3 dedicated folks that will spend about a 6 or 8 week cycle specifically focused on projects. It's how do we get them out of the mainstream and learn to not firefight? How do we get ahead of the scheme and using what they've learned to feed the model back? So yeah, actually, I think we can wait more time on these if we do this in a certain pattern and develop the work that we're catching ahead of time. Something we haven't done as a district. We've been kind of, when it fails, we got something ready to go, we'll throw it in and replace it. Well, what's the frequency? Or what was the cause? Was it something else, right? So it's teaching our folks when they're going to a site and they're assigned something, it gives them instruction. When you hear, look at this, check this, and take these parts with you. We're saying like, here's the work order. By the way, here's the parts. We're in it. We've got a system that sets up. We have part of this discussion we've had over the last month is what can our system do? My system that I worked with in the past, and we've got this one to do it now is I have a work order 5 months from now. My parts is 4-month lead time. It tells me order this part because you need it in 4 months. You can set the frequency of buying. So we don't have to have 100 things on the shelf. We can plan our buying expenditures and set our budgets to the planning we expect to do, the timeframe we expect to do it. In addition to that, all these same tools helps us set a predictive budget. So we already started kind of the minor reports that we're doing as roofs, one of them. Hey, we know the replacement cycle is 25 years. We can say, these roofs this year need done. This is the next year. And this is what section needs done. We can break it as fine as we want it. Have it at some, when we get done, this done this exercise 5 different times in my career. It takes a good 2 years. Seems like a very long time, but that's actually very short. You think, right? The first time, you don't have to touch it again. And it maintains new assets come in, you add the asset, you put the frequency, you put the timing, and it evolves with the program. But we start to predict on the budget. I've got to replace all of these work orders this year. Here's my work orders. Here's the budget. I need 6 million, 5 million, 8 million, whatever that is. And it tells us what we need to do for replacement. And then also we know the expenditure of time and labor of the work orders to assess and minor repair. Sets budget. And it gets very consistent. As you learn over time, it gets more and more and more concrete. So those are the settings that we're setting to do. We've got one of the schools about half done. Obviously, we know we got 52 other schools, right? So they've been going around doing a full assessment of where we are as our current work orders, in addition to gathering more data at the actual site, working with a custodian, working with our trades, getting the finite detail, and some of it can then be repeated. Whatever schools have some of the same things, and use that template to go other ways. But every school is not created equal.
Yeah.
We have to then do finite details in those schools. As we learn and repair, we find out we're firefighting, that immediately goes into a work order stream. So we're building as we firefight, we're catching it on one end, and we're also building it on the other end, right? And in the middle, we shall meet. So, like I said, 3 trades coming out. We're working forward to getting that forward. We've already got some guys reacting, right? So we're trying to identify the first 3 who come out. We've got some people that actually are eager to do that because they want to go back and kind of show how to build the systems. And we're not taking our leads out. It's the other folks, and the leads can guide the work. But that's currently how we're setting up for long range forecasting, building that project task force team. We have a weekly catch up meeting, and they're working 3 days a week, getting this information pulled together with individual subgroups as it goes. Next slide. So as we keep going in February, I'll come back and I'll report on kind of where we are with getting through some of our priorities, where we're seeing the budgeting. I'm hoping to show some examples of how we're using our system now, of how we're creating that data, how we're creating where we're looking as a vision. So you'll kind of see and adapt of what it looks like when we're working through this process. We get a vision of being, how do we get out of the weeds? And then also in February, as for the agenda for operation work groups, we'll do a review of transportation. What are we doing? How are we doing service levels? How we're providing for our students? Working through that.
Thank you. Board Member Nichols.
Okay, first of all, I've never been so excited about work streams, work orders and processes. talking about them. You brought some passion to that. Thank you.
Love it.
I love the idea of trying to get more predictive and planful and really assessing and knowing what's going on in each of our buildings. So I appreciate that. I do have one question. So the board had approved like a sustainability manager role. I'm wondering if is there an update on that, just as you're starting to think about also all the other work that's starting to happen with
Absolutely.
the referendum projects.
Yes, we had an offer go out. We had an individual pass on the offer. We have another individual coming through.
Okay.
We had phenomenal candidates, and it was, which way. We made a choice. An next person, we put an offer out. I think it's tomorrow morning.
Okay.
And we'll continue to move forward with that. So
so you're already in process.
we are
of
well into
point
the
of
process.
Sending offers. Okay.
When we are getting to long range facilities plan, that's a big goal for us.
Yeah.
In addition to the referendum. So as we talk to our folks, it's their job to help pay themselves back in the district tenfold. And also line our goals with sustainability and the long range goals of the board.
Okay. Right, thank you.
And again, Board Member Muldrow, then Board Member Mosner Falcom.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that the focus of our facilities referendum is our middle schools for the most part. And so I think that I have a question about how that planning is gonna happen in collaboration with kind of the instructional reimagining of our middle schools. And so if that means, we're thinking about what it means to offer self-defense classes as FIAD, or we're thinking what it means to offer dance or theater, how does that go into the building? And also, if you're looking at kind of technology, what do spaces for 3D printers look like, or what do spaces at that level? And how consistent are we gonna be across the district in terms of that approach? And I guess this is a more process-driven question, not about what we're gonna do, it's about how we're gonna be there.
I can tell you from our initial conversations, we're looking at hands-on immersion, looking at obviously very highly technical, because our culture and society is driving towards technology. The ability to have arts at all of the middle schools, whether it be a theater, a type of stage setup, so to give them a chance to do more performing arts. Those are big discussions that we're having now, and it's part of that planning of, we're gonna put some of these spaces in there. And then beyond that is, do we specialize more in one of the schools, maybe more specialty depending on where it's around in the area, right? So those are discussions we started having last week. As we start to develop that over the next, I would say 60 to 90 days, we'll really start to feel what those communal spaces will look like.
I really look forward to that work, and I think that that's work that's deeply important to our community and deeply important to our educators. And so I think the second part of that question is, how are we including the voices of our community and our educators and our young people in designing these schools, and making sure they're accessible and that they're offering the most kind of relevant opportunities to our young people academically. I know we're just getting started, and I think it's a really exciting area to get to explore in partnership with you all. So thank you. I think about kind of the stewardship of our buildings, and I think about that as like a cultural phenomenon. That there is an attitude towards our buildings that if you drop a piece of trash, it's somebody else's job to come pick it up. And I think that you see expressions of that throughout our district. And throughout our world, if you're being really honest, and so I wonder how some of the decisions we make in terms of renovating our spaces speak to the kinds of culture we want. And I also think it would be great if every trash can was accompanied by a recycle bin. It would be great if all of our cafeterias had spaces for composting. And I'm not sure if the way to get there is through policy, and the board just says, hey, we have a policy. Everywhere where there's a trash can, there's a recycle bin, and every cafeteria we're participating in composting. Or if there is a conversation we need to have about kind of planning in our facilities and how to navigate those spaces strategically and create those opportunities. And really realize the full cultural impact of being both good stewards of our buildings and good stewards of our greater environment. And I guess maybe, you know, alleviating some of our young people's anxiety around whether or not the adults in their lives are taking the environment seriously and taking just kind of basic steps to protect the environment in partnership with them.
Yeah, I'll add something. That's part of my passion, why I've come from an industry that was very zero carbon footprint. So adding those spaces along with working with our sustainability manager in our community is, you know, adding that double feature, right? Recycling it and a waste stream and looking at green box punches for our cafeteria spaces for composting. And then the bigger picture also is the managing the waste stream out of the building, right? It's, do you have the right tools outside of the building to ensure you can be sustainable as far as keeping the program going? So that's part of that exterior space that we've started to have conversations about access to the waste trash. How do you then not have some go out composting, but you can't get to, or it becomes a nuisance, or it becomes, those are things that stop programs. So we're working kind of on the front end. What does a view look like? And then how do we manage it in the space so we don't have, you know, public input or some other challenges which may cut the program entirely because it's a nuisance that wasn't thought of in the beginning.
Yeah, I think there's complexity to that. I think there's self-sustaining approaches to that, right? What does it mean to compost and have a community garden? And there are sites that really allow for that sort of thing, and there are sites that absolutely do not, especially given kind of the size and the number of people we feed in a given day. I think it's important to remember that there are more people who go to West High School than go to all of the Wanakee School District, right? Like we have more kids in our one building than that entire community has in every building. And so I think like, what is our capacity to do that in a self-sustaining way? What is our capacity to partner with the city of Madison to do something like composting and recycling effectively? And so that it's not a symbolic thing, right? And so that it is something that we're executing with fidelity. And I very much appreciate kind of your overall proactive approach to this conversation. I want to think about our fleet. I think we did a really good job over the last 10 years of replacing our fleet before it is worthless, replacing our fleet before it is hazardous, being intentional. My hope is that we continue to do that work, but that we are replacing our fleet with electric vehicles strategically. And so really understanding what percentage of our fleet is electric right now and what's our goal long-term. And I guess, do you have the ability to speak to that at this moment?
I don't have all the concrete numbers. I know that we are limited at certain aspects of our business because we have to have high torque machines. So those are some of the challenges that we have, but some of our normal fleeted vehicles, as we start to turn them over, is obviously a huge push for electrification.
I think the other thing I'll say is really specific to Bob, and it's about the structural relationship we have to maintaining our facilities and our budget. And there is the referendum, which is really about kind of new investments in our buildings lasting long term. And then there is the just normal upkeep of our you know, sites and schools. I've heard from community members that there is a concern that like we're investing a lot in the new stuff and that we are not strategically allocating enough each year to maintaining and repairing our so I am curious if we need to start thinking about what it looks like to increase kind of our standard amount related to the upkeep and repairs of our buildings.
Yeah. Scott's doing a great job working with his staff he's hiring to come up with that dollar amount, right? That's a lot of what they're talking about in terms of long range planning. There's dedicated staff to come up with building by building, what's needed and what's the priority. You need that data to come up with, are we spending enough to maintain? We don't have those numbers yet, but Scott's putting them data points together, so.
I just think that's such an important part of how we have this conversation in the long term. And I think of next year as kind of our launch pad into kind of best practice and into these projects. And I think we have to be grateful for our community and deeply responsible to this investment. And in order to be deeply responsible to this investment, we have to be able to maintain this investment. So we can't build a brand new building and let it rapidly disintegrate because we're not making the necessary investment in routine maintenance. And I think that's just a conversation I look forward to us having and really thinking, you know, where did we kind of come up with our initial relationship to how much we're spending per year? And how do we need to update that for this modern moment? I really appreciate your answers to this question. I look forward to continuing to have this conversation, and your emphasis on sustainability is deeply meaningful to me as a board member.
If I can add one quick thing, we're developing the budget for cost. There's also the budget of what are we externally putting out for bid and doing for work. So we're evaluating, you know, potentially add more trades internally to be able to do project work in addition to more upkeep, right? So there's a very fine line and balance between just buying parts, but how do you maintain other features of the business? And that's kind of where we're in that. What is a true assessment of what, as we get through the budgeting process, we'll have those recommendations to catch up, I would say, and then we'll continue.
I feel like the thing that's missing for me in the conversation often about this is where do we get to the place of cost savings in relationship to renewable energy? And I am hoping as we continue to have that conversation around long-term investment, that that's factored in strategically.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Yep.
Thanks. Thank you. So exciting. I have 2, 3, maybe 4 quick things. When you talk about a grading known facility challenges, are you talking about stuff like the blinds are broken in that classroom, that minute?
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. I don't think 2 years sounds like a long time. I think 2 years sounds like incredibly efficient for something like this. That was not one of my questions. Just letting you know. When the monthly report that you talked about, that's something that's being produced by your team and the Concord group.
That's
for public, like just posted, it'll go out in the weekly updates to us and, okay. And then for my are these questions? No, they're not, they're suggestions. I really encourage you to talk to the high school principals that ran the referenda.
Yep, lessons learned public.
Yeah, and I encourage you to do that, not just because they know important stuff, but also because they worked to like the very extent of their capacity through those referenda, and to acknowledge that, I think matters. Like that, it would be a shame to miss that learning. And it would be a shame to miss the opportunity to talk face to face with the people who made that happen. Likewise, it would be a real shame for students to watch this construction outside of their building and not have it show up in their curriculum. So I see and I understand that all of the design planning that you're talking about is like, what does this building look like? What does the electrical look like? But I think that there's space in your collaboration with teaching and learning, collaboration with your leadership team, to say, what does it look like for Sherman students in these years to have this as part of their curriculum? And that takes a lot of work to figure out. And I think that it could look really in depth, and it could look like, hey, we've got assemblies for you set up with a couple of people in the neighborhood or on the construction team or whatever, but it's not to be missed, I think. Similar to that, I think it would also be a mistake as we're decommissioning and deconstructing buildings that thousands and thousands of children, well, now adults, people have had their educational experiences, and it would be a shame to miss the opportunity to connect with elders in the community about what did Sherman and Shabazz mean to them? What was it like in the day? A real shame to miss that opportunity to connect those neighbors and elders with students, to reconnect those neighbors and elders with the district. And I know that that's not what the builders rep is thinking about, but you're not the builders rep. Are you saying I'm thinking about it?
If I can.
Go ahead, that's all.
So we do have a plan.
Yay.
There will be a ceremony for all of our buildings that will come down.
Okay,
There will be opportunity to have videography and working with our communications team to tie in the legacy of those buildings. Put to the final.
Love it.
Some of those will be repurposed, the materials to will be moved, materials we moved to Senate's base.
oh my God.
Happen. There will be large community events as far as getting our kids to learn what it takes to do such skills and trades. In addition to, I've had Senate already reach out and classroom teach of how this process will. So I'm working with Senate to help develop something with that and offer that out as, this is how this process works.
Love it.
And give them at least understanding, because this is coming in their backyard. So they can kind of get a foreview of what that will look like.
Beautiful. Love to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just have like one technical question that I think I missed. When we were reshaping our goals around renewable energy and sustainability, one of the things we heard over and over again is that part of what made it hard to achieve that goal by 2040 was that we would have to close multiple schools a year. We were told if we shifted the goal in a specific way, we would be closing fewer schools. It doesn't look like this plan requires us to close any school. Am I correct?
That has not been a discussion since I've been here.
Okay,
Could I clarify?
yes,
Do you mean so that we have spaces for children while construction is taking?
yes.
Okay, so not permanently.
No, closing schools for the purposes of renovating the school. But what it looks like to me is we're not talking as much about renovation as we are talking about building entirely new schools.
8 of the 10 in these 3 phases are replacements, so they're brand new builds,
Okay,
giving us the ability to have construction while children are in their current schools.
that, I love that. And the 2 that are not, that are going to be renovated, are we going to be asking those students to move out of that school while the school is renovated?
So I will share as a project goal for this team is to have 10 new sites, new schools for these kids to enroll. This all starts with planning now, is having the preliminary designs and the curriculum and teaching and all the things in the spaces that they are in the first year of action. That tells us the path, whether we do it or we can't. We have a renovation plan for the last 2 schools, if we choose to do renovation or the budget can't allow this to. But our goal with our CMs and our group is to design a school that meets all of the criteria, using and leveraging the tools and the buying power which we will have, and being smart in our decisions to not have to renovate. If we have to renovate, then we'll have an option and be able to either expedite the renovation and potentially use one of our existing sites. For example, putting it out there, we're not sure, but Crestwood maybe moves to Cherokee before Cherokee has its time. And then we'll be able to do unoccupied work in that school to not disrupt and sound what they call summer slam, where you have more risk of issues, where things aren't being done right and costs more money and you run into more issues, versus make it unoccupied, make it continuous. And the same thing for Ananda. Maybe they go to Toki Orchard Ridge, one of the 2 schools before it gets taken where it's going to be, and then have an unoccupied building. So we're not stepping the process, that actually can take the time and be fiscally responsible to do that.
Okay, I just think it's important because we said to the community over and over again that we could be closing so many schools per year in order to meet this goal. And it just sounds like that's not actually going to happen. And what is going to happen is that students are going to stay in their normal attendance area in their building while another building is being constructed, with the exception of 2 schools potentially, but not for sure. And we don't necessarily have a plan, but we are considering what it would look like for that student population to join another student population at a different building.
Be the same, their same population, just a different.
Okay.
So their same peers would be together. They would displace for a year or whatever it might be, while we can have that building. Some of these spaces are really tight, so we're trying to manage around that. And temporary school buildings are not a good to educate.
I think that's really exciting in part because I think both the displacement of students is really challenging, as well as having your school be under construction while you try to study is really challenging. So I think we're avoiding some pretty specific challenges, but I did see Dr. Gother. I'm excited for you to chime in.
You framed it very nicely. There are some potential conflicts or disturbances, parking lots, entrances. I mean, these are going to be construction sites and they will be disrupted. So, you know, our parents, family members, transportation, we're going to need a great deal of patience while we do this to minimize what's just being disturbed inside the buildings.
And I know, if I can add to that, there will be a plan. And it will be broadcasted well before that time. This is what it will look like 5 months from now, 6 months, so people in communities can plan around that event.
I feel like I just want to make sure when you say there'll be a plan and it's one thing to say it in like this space, but if it's like my kid going to this school, how are like the communication with the parents, families, educators directly impacted, what that looks like, I think is really, really important. And I don't doubt our ability to navigate well and great people, but I just want to name in this space that I think the outward, you know, larger conversation or telling of this story to the community is one thing. And then the real nuts and bolts of like what this means for any given student is a slightly different task. And so I greatly appreciate speaking to that. And I also think it's to be celebrated that we can do this work without closing buildings or without displacing students.
Okay. Board Member Fernando?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing into construction in schools while students are there. With this next round, I would strongly suggest that you look into a continuous feedback loop, because I think sometimes, like in the 4 years that, or however long it was that like West was under construction, there would be some fixes that were really bothering like teachers and like getting in the way of learning that maybe were easier fixes than others, but because a lot of times there wasn't that type of like feedback and like that way to report that type of thing and like get confirmation that your voice has been heard. I think there was a lot of increased frustration, especially amongst educators. And I'm sure that there was something in place during that time, but I would just ask that this time around, there's a little bit more oversight on like a topic like that.
Thank you.
Okay. The only question I have is that, talking about improving work streams and predictability or, when we purchase things, seeing as these are multi-year projects, will that help us smooth out the variance and inflation increases or decreases as it relates to materials, or be able to maximize the value of the buck depending on the year?
When it comes to regular predictive maintenance, we'll be subjected to some of that unless we have opportunities to buy in mass. If we're planning a longer, bigger strategy to replace X, I'm saying a sensor or B, there's a chance there. You tend to not to get a lot of inflation. You can look at alternatives. Sometimes with that predictability, you can say, okay, this was my one and now I can substitute. So that gives us ability to do that versus I have to buy the same thing because I don't have time to look for something else. So there is some inflationary offset there, a possibility. But normally you see that kind of static built in, and that'll be built into our rolling predictive budget as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was an issue with buying materials for the high school renovation, but that was during COVID with kind of historic, maybe, hopefully, one-time increases. So.
With the referendum work, our goal is once we've identified the core basis of what we're doing, things are repetitive. Like we're buying not just one of those, we're buying 4,000 of those. We're gonna try to buy 4,000. But with the caveat, work with the manufacturer, I only need 500 now, 500 here. So we're locking the price So we're not locking inflationary needs, right? We're giving them a chance to manufacture as they demand it, not slamming a factory.
Mhm.
And the other side of it is if we have to buy immediate, then we have the ability to store it at our CM's facility. So we can then take advantage of that. So those are things that there's potential to save multiple millions of dollars by maximizing the buying potential, by having commonalities in all the buildings, and also helps with maintenance predictability. With 10 facilities, same type of pumps being, same type of processes there. So it helps us build that long term as well.
Okay, yeah, I said one question, but I guess one last thing, in the future, I think it'd be useful to be able to talk with the people who are designing the new schools, as we're talking about sustainability and climate resiliency, how we can build in with nature or build with nature, as opposed to just bulldozing over it, things like that.
As we get through this first phase, we're in the preliminary side, but I think coming March, maybe April, we can have a session where we operate from work group, where we can bring some of our key players in. We can have some discussion about what this looks like and how does it start to incorporate. And you'll get to kind of meet the team that's working around this whole project.
Cool, thank you, Scott. All right. On to policies.
Okay. Maya, you wanna go first? Or does Bob wanna go first, or? Okay. Bob, me, back.
There's 3 policies up for initial review. I'll start the conversation. First policy is the way to identify state, federal, and special funding. Most applicable to action, so I'll be addressing our recommendation there. Next policy, 2601, long distance phone calls, and then 3030 school calls and implement other. Dr. McCray, are you leading the conversations on those 2 or on the
No.
long distance?
Thank you.
Awesome. So it's there.
So everyone should have at their desk out of all 3 policies. And they're pretty straightforward. About and then listen, looking to send, and then the school closing one, there's just a few little changes there. Have a discussion about all of them, Bob, but if again, local finance.
Sure. So it's the policy 2608, if you have it in front of you, identifying local state fiscal and federal funding. It has not been revised since 2001. 2 years ago. I'll say our recommendation to rescind this policy, couple of reasons. One, the process of identifying and seeking state, federal, and special funding, really what we do every year as part of the budget process in terms of existing programming, new costs. Part of budget is identifying how we're gonna fund those new costs. So it really is part of our normal process. And then I would say, more importantly, since 2001, the district has done a very good job of developing web-based materials and a process and a procedure, how we work with different teams and different parties that are interested in applying for specific grants. We have a website on resource development. Carrie Stahl is our grants manager. She works with all the different programs. We have a process where they submit an application to our team. We make sure the money and purpose is in alignment with our strategic goals and our priorities of our budgeting. So we really do have a well-defined process and procedure that's publicly accessible on the website. And we do trainings every year with all the department heads and school principals on that process. So really don't feel this policy is necessary to be a board policy, because it is really part of how we do business today. So that's our recommendation.
And just a quick question, this is the first meeting where we have to, so these will come back to us a month from now?
Yes,
Yes, this is our first. Go ahead.
this is our first touch point, then there'll a month or so, and we will try and schedule to be able to have our second touch point, followed by the third one, which will be on the day we vote.
Yeah, I just want to check that the second touch point is already scheduled for a special
Yes.
policy in February.
Thank
so
you.
That one's already scheduled. Then
Thank
the
you.
third one would be just a vote at the February meeting. But I
Beautiful.
think Petra and Malcolm wanted to kind of interject about the rescinding policies because there's some clarity that we want to make sure that everybody has.
Yeah, just to clarify, so policy 1301, which is in regards to adopting the policy or revising current policy. So upon further examination of that one, when we're rescinding policies, we're not expressly required to have 2 open meetings where the board reviews the policy prior to voting on it at a regular meeting of the board. And so in the interest of expediting the process, we could, in terms of rescinding policy at the next regular board meeting, move forward with rescinding those 2 policies, notwithstanding any comments or questions, that would require us to meet and do those again.
Yeah, it was thought with rescinding that we would need to have more time, but that's just me. Because if we're rescinding some, we're taking it off, I just want to make sure we're right, that's me.
Board Member Muldrow.
I guess is the question or process we're engaged in right now is deciding whether or not the majority of the board would be interested in rescinding the policy and therefore if we should move forward immediately because we don't need the 2 meetings.
The 2 meeting question was just my own personal question, but right now the current discussion is on rescinding this policy or not.
For the recommendation. We could engage in this conversation, decide to rescind it, and then we would vote at the regular board meeting to rescind it.
Yeah.
We wouldn't need that second touch point required to review.
Which could be decided at, and whether we want to have that second touch point at a later time, but.
I just think we're gonna get in trouble. Legally, I think it's completely sound, and I agree with Petra. I'm just tend to be overly cautious on this, that when we're changing something, we're taking something out, we wanna make sure that no one is too hasty. Cause once something is gone, it's harder to put back.
The 24-year.
That's fair. We'll let the team, policy team figure that out.
I'm not,
But
but I'm not gonna die this hill if that's what the board, or that's what the majority of the board wants, I'm for it, that's my one piece of caution more than anything.
So just really quick as a reminder,
Mhm.
even so tonight is our first pass through of this one. We have the special meeting that's scheduled in February. We could still have the conversation for rescinded policies at that meeting, should that be the desire of the board, because the meeting is already scheduled.
Mhm.
So I just don't want us to get too caught up on that piece of, remember, the second date is already scheduled, already out there, so it's there for us to be able to do.
Yep.
so any questions or concerns on rescinding this current policy? Board Member Moses.
Really quick. Do I understand correctly that we would rescind it? Like just to not have extra and unneeded policies for like the purpose of having things be neat, streamlined. That's like the basic idea, because this policy is like fine. It's not like, gosh, this is horrific or anything. It's just like, let's have a nice, neat set of policies that people know and can use.
Currently, we have 5,000 policies on or about.
Yeah, so I think part of this, for this in particular, the last time we reviewed this was in 2001.
Right.
And so we think about the timing and the fact that it's already baked into the way we operate. It's unnecessary to have a bunch of policies that don't necessarily relate to. I mean, it relates to the work, but we already have things that are guiding it, so, yeah.
And do you see any like consequences or drawbacks to not having this in policy, or do you feel like?
I don't, but I can defer to our council.
No, I think that we couldn't go ahead rescinding this.
That's it, those are my questions.
Michelle?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So this policy, and we have another one that's coming up. On long distance phone calls. All
We're finally getting rid of.
all sit in the 2000 suite.
Mhm.
The 2000 suite is the administration. policies, things like long distance phone calls, office days, a commencement speaker fee, fundraising reporting, district expenditures for food and beverage. So shall I assume that the recommendation to rescind this one and then whatever we're gonna look at with the long distance one, is that because the 2,000 suite was reviewed? And then you all decided like out of this suite, here are the ones that seem no longer current, no longer useful, or what, or was it not that?
We looked at some of the oldest ones and some of the ones that were no longer relevant. The ones that we found no longer relevant were ones that either were the oldest or ones where there's already a procedure that was duplicated.
Okay, so this one isn't necessarily because the 2,000 suite was
No,
reviewed in totality. You were looking at last date of update,
yes,
and then also looking at like what's still relevant,
correct.
current kind of operations.
And if it was duplicated somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have any objection to rescinding this one.
Board Member Muldrow.
I don't necessarily have an objection to rescinding this. I think like what we're looking at is a semi-benign policy. Like we're saying we would take this policy off the books and that wouldn't necessarily change our approach to seeking funding aggressively. And you know, the district has a way of engaging philanthropically with our community, grants and a variety of things in terms of resources. I do want to say, if we're as a board, like diving into policy conversation, I would hope that we're balancing both kind of a standard upkeep of our policy with policies that the board is actually like passionate about pursuing. And I guess I wonder if no individual board member went through our policies and said, this is the policy, I really want to rescind this is what I want to do. How did we get there?
Yeah, so part of
I'd get
what
part
of what the policy committee is first looking at is what policies are just like old. Like which ones are just like so old and which ones that we don't need. Just so that we can get to a spot where we're cleaning up just like our policies. Second, we're also looking at right now is like what policies are compliance based. And so those are the first kind of buckets of policy that we're really trying to heavy look at because a lot of our policies are really out of date. We have a lot of policies to look at. And just the sheer number of policies that we need to get through, if we want to be aggressive, I don't think our board per se could do that real time at the time that we were like thinking about this plan. And so right now, that is kind of where we're at. I mean, if we are still working on a process of like, if there are things that come up throughout, for instance, there has been some requests for certain things. We look at the operations and the instruction work group, things that were shared with us, and then kind of like tailor it to that. So that's kind of where we're at now.
Okay, then the last thing I'll say about this policy specifically is, I think like a lot of times, if I look at my own record of voting for policy on this board, there are a significant amount of policies that have happened in as a reaction to something specific, right? So, yeah, I feel like, yeah, you were there. But I think like, I guess with a policy like this, I would be curious about whether or not there is some kind of data that supports this policy being on the books, meaning, did we start applying for more grants? Did we hire more staff related to, like, did this policy at the time spark a different approach to how we navigated resources? And do we need to have kind of a before and after snapshot of the impact of a given policy? Because I can't imagine the board in 2001 was just like, we're bored today, let's write about this.
Like, looks like a 9/11 policy.
Sure. But I would imagine that there was some reason the board wanted this on the books, and we we have a decent amount of distance from that and may want to review what necessitated the policy in the first place to have a better understanding. So I hope we don't have 3 conversations about this policy. However, if we have to vote to rescind the policy, I hope the information about the impact of the policy and why the policy was originally voted on by the board is provided to us. Cause I would hate to not have that historical information. Like, I wouldn't know that West High School had geothermal heat if it wasn't for a former board member calling me and saying, hey, when you guys do the referendum, make sure you don't do anything weird to that $10 million buried under the field that is the HVAC system, that is geothermal. So I think I haven't received that kind of information in these conversations with our administration where they go, oh, this is why the board did this at that time. But I think it's relevant.
I can provide a history of that will be
For this
due for, yeah. We could just add that as a section, history,
We can talk about it as a.
if that's okay. Yeah, I'm not trying to make you the letter. I was just suggesting possibly we could add like a section that says history. If the policy committee would enjoy.
Well, it's more so than history, like impact.
Okay. Suggestion.
Thank you.
Any other questions about this one? Okay, what's the next policy?
Next policy was chosen not just because of age, which the last time it was looked at was 2001, but because since I got on this board, I've wanted to get rid of this policy. I personally dislike this policy. We do not have votes, so long distance calls really are not an option, especially with the prevalence of cell phone. So this one, I did suggest not just on logic, not just the age, but the fact of wanted to move past Back to the Future time and get actually what.
Fairly. I see any policies about beepers, so
No, we don't have any on those.
beepers and pagers and what have and the like. Okay, next policy. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So for this one, aren't employees able to make long distance phone calls? Cause I thought they still could.
They can.
So
That's why we're
you
getting.
wanna take the policy away when it's still a reality?
Because currently, so like when you look at the policy,
You need permission. They
You don't-
don't need permission
you
right
don't
now.
need permission anymore to make from the phone calls, like none of these things are applicable anymore as they were back in the day. So I'm pretty sure that back in the day, like I used to have to dial such.
Oh,
and
I
such
see what you're
before.
saying. So when you
now
look
you
at
don't have
like
to
1,
do-
2.
Correct.
You really wanna know, there used to be a little blue card that you had to fill out anytime you used a long distance phone. Made a
Oh,
long
God.
distance phone call and handed it in. That's how they were tracked.
But our phone systems won't just pick up the phone and dial.
Okay.
I don't think we're charged.
This is getting
So can I
right now.
Can I just ask you? Okay, so this one reflects an outdated system.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, now I'm gonna sound like board member Muldrow now. I'm gonna start asking some questions now. So if we remove this policy and everybody can pick up the phone and make a long distance call, you don't need a policy for that, but then how do you monitor? Or do you long distance phone calls? Cause it feels like this was written at a time where it was like they were trying to be some control and, you know, like kind of tight monitoring. So similar to this other one, like, is there, I mean, it's a different angle. I guess I'm going back to what board member Muldrow was saying, is like, there must have been a reason why the policy was
Definitely.
initially written. And so if we're gonna remove it, cool. But then what's in place of it right now as a practice or procedure?
And I probably would take I would take a guess and believe that probably number 6 in this one is what's driving this, the financial implication of it. Which now long distance phone calls, you can just make them from our cell phones, from our regular phones. Like there's not a charge that incurred in the fee. So here, I would probably say, not being here when this was here in 01, that probably was the rationale on why this policy was created to control how long distance phone calls were happening, monitored, and what was the process when they were actually happening.
Right, for sure. I can read that. So you're saying that we are no longer worried about any employee picking up a phone and making a long distance phone call at all? Okay.
Okay. On to the next one.
Okay. Sorry. I'm just saying, I literally, when Ali was saying
Please don't come back.
nostalgia, I was thinking of my phone card anyways, my long distance phone card as a kid.
I mean, you had to wait till after 7 o'clock.
Yeah, it used to be 9. Okay. So this one is just the closing of schools, inclement weather. So we are just updating the language to say employee handbook instead of applicable collective bargaining agreement. This has not been reviewed since 2002. I was I think. Currently the handbook went in effect of 2016 and yeah, and so these revisions are part of that already, so.
Okay, any question, board member Mosterfeld?
I'm wondering, knowing that portions of Act 10 have been overturned and are awaiting appeal, like, does that change your thinking about this shift at all?
No, because one, it hasn't completely been repealed. We don't necessarily know the facts, and I think it's in the employee handbook. So, but I would defer to our counsel to answer that.
Yeah, so the relevant portions are in the employee handbook. So when the collective bargaining agreements expired in June of 2016, that information could then be found in the employee handbook. And so, yeah, I mean, if you pull it up, there's the FAQ section. It's in section 3.3 of the handbook that sets forth expectations for employee attendance.
Okay, and then if we just like, if in 2 years we have a CBA instead of a handbook, we could just go back and change it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's it for me.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other question? Okay. May I please get a motion?
So moved.
Okay. Board member Fernando, your advisory vote?
Aye.
Okay. Board member Pearson seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Thanks, team.